kind of just rocking with the music, you know, like I don't even need to start the stream. I'm kind of just vibing right now. Right now. Listen, I got the notifications out. It's only 2:03. That's like basically not even late. Let me scroll like 400 reels real quick. Hey, yo, Jake, remind me, where'd you go to art school? I didn't go to art school, my friend. I didn't go to art school. I did 1 year at like a state university, and then it was terrible. I didn't really learn anything, so I left. And then, yeah, just learned all online. Ramon Hurtado taught most of everything I learned online, and that's the guy who I teach my course with. You know, I gotta restart the stream real quick. It's gonna stay in the same link. I just gotta change the settings and it won't let me because it doesn't like it when I stream in 4K for some reason. So 1 second. Okay, we're back. It's so sick that I got the somehow this background video corrupted to the point where I got this like green stink aura, and now I don't want to get rid of it because it's just badass. I have no idea how it happened. But I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch it at all because it might get fixed if I touch it because I didn't change anything. All right, everybody, let's do this. It's the greatest soundtrack of all time. The classic mainstay in the Jake Don't Draw universe. Hello everybody, this is Jake Don't Draw. Welcome to the Jake Don't Draw live stream Super Show Extravaganza Super Experience. I used the word super twice, so this one's already over. It's just not a good one. You know, sometimes you don't hit them all. Welcome in everybody, this is the crit stream that we do every other week. This time, it was for a nice little challenge. Well, it's actually always for a challenge. A figure challenge is what I meant to say. Only 6 minutes. It's not technically 6 minutes if I start the starting soon screen at 2 and then I'm 6 minutes late. You know, because it's just when the stream starts, really. It's called a loophole. I tried really hard in this one, but I just couldn't get the proportions down. I just know I'm in shit tier once again. We're all in shit tier, brother. That's just how it works. You know, we'll talk about proportions. That's kind of what I like. Literally 50% of everyone. I think I just put in like the proportions category. You know, we'll get back to that. You know, more specifically, I can show you guys what we're working with here. We had over like 60 submissions this week, which was, it's nice. It's a good one. It's a nice, just classic figure challenge. So that's looking really good. And we'll introduce that for a second, in a second here. Where's the Coke Zero? I'm out of Coke Zero right now. It's like it's crazy. It's crazy. It's probably a good thing though. Let me say hi to people in chat. I'm just, do I even have to censor this? I don't have to censor any reference photos on YouTube, but sometimes YouTube will just flag me anyway, so I don't want to deal with it. But this reference photo literally doesn't have anything in it other than like pubes, which I don't think they would get me for, so I'm not gonna censor it. If it does get censored, then I can like contact my rep and like, you know, get it remonetized so that I can get my $20 back that I make on each of these streams, which, you know, it starts to get into a point of whether or not it's even worth it. Hello, Crip and Makuder and Mira and Emily and Soom and McCoster and Kate and Nonetheless and DJ and Hey Guys, it's me and everybody in the chat. It's nice to see you all. It's going to be a beautiful stream here. I got mine that I'm working on in the background over here. Watching this from the shower. All right. Took the nude drawing part a little too literally. Well, you're probably not drawing in the shower. Let me get my my tablet out under here. Guys, I'm kind of like traditional art maxing nowadays. I'm kind of back on the trad art stuff. Just because I've been looking at a bunch of 19th century stuff again. I'm working on a new YouTube video, by the way, doing a lot of research on 19th century stuff, and it's just hella inspiring to me right now. It's like really, really into like naturalist painters and all that type of stuff. Right now I'm reading through... The next YouTube video is going to be about how photography changed painting in the 19th century. I've been reading this book, Against the Modern, about Daniel Bouvreau, really great naturalist painter. Despite the title, Against the Modern, it's not some sort of like modern art is degenerate book. It's just a retrospective about Daniel's career. Honestly, I'm really not even sure why it's called that, because like he kind of was like he rejected like modernism, but he was still a modernist compared to like the old master painters. I am also about to read Beyond Impressionism, The Naturalist Impulse. Got a couple books from the library for this one. You know, that's how we're doing it these days. I think literally in the back, I won't show the back of it because it says like my local library name, I think. But the book is over 20 years old, and I'm the first person to ever check it out, I think. It's kind of the most, I'm like, if you try to get into a niche off with me, try to go out, you know, try to go niche for me, I'm going to pull out Beyond the Modern, you know, my Gabriel Weisberg books, and you just can't outdo me on that front. Don't try to go niche for me. Charles Nagier. Or Negra? I don't know this guy, so thank you. Oh, he studied under Delaroche, Ingres, and drawing. Nice. So he's an early to mid, really like a mid 19th century artist. Cool. Yeah, look this guy up. I don't know. I have been more researching right now, like the naturalist painters and kind of how they integrate. I think they were kind of like the first people to integrate photography into their workflow like a lot, and they achieved some really interesting stuff. And there's a lot of interesting commentary at the time that's like, these new painters are using photography and it takes no skill, and the masses, all they like is hyper detail, like hyper realist or photorealist work, and they don't appreciate like harmony and simplicity in their paintings anymore. They're just easily pleased by lots of excess detail. And it's funny because like, that's the exact same type of crit that I give to like modern hyperrealist work. And I think that's a lot of the critique that people have of like any sort of realism in general. But this is what, the people were saying about people in the 1880s. So it's really interesting, and I think it has some like interesting parallels to AI and stuff like that as well. Although I don't consider like AI to be comparable to the camera. That kind of has its own issues. Is any type of paint harder to work with than others? Certainly ones like watercolor have their own difficulties because you can't, paint over them. I think oil paint it's the most maybe difficult in that it requires like kind of a higher investment, initial investment. And it can be a little bit messier and harder to set up. But if you have it set up, I think oil painting is by far the easiest painting medium, actually, because it's infinitely reworkable. Is it possible to get Adolf Ivan's charcoal drawings anywhere? I have a bunch, but I don't know if I'm able to show them. Sometimes I have images that are copyrighted. You just have to maybe look for the museums that own Ivan drawings, as well as look for auction results on like Invaluable. Are you still making? There's a good post about Soria talking about how he used. Oh yeah, can you send that to me on Discord, Zoe? That would be great. You can just DM it to me. That'd be really nice. Jake, why didn't you finish your painting in the back? Because it takes a lot of time. I'm still gonna work on it and finish it. I know I always say that, but I actually really do want to finish this one. I'm very motivated towards this one right now. God, what a banger! I just gotta say, guys, like, there's this guy. His name is Tim Fallon. Tim Fallon. He made a bunch of soundtracks for like NES games or whatever that nobody ever heard of. And nobody played these games, I don't think. Maybe some of you guys played these games. Maybe I'm just too young. These are the most banger soundtracks of all time. Like, they're like the most goated soundtracks ever. This says the only game. This was the only game for the Sega Mega Drive. How do you have a console with one game? The Sega Genesis. It was released in 1988. And apparently just had one game, which doesn't really... I have a hard time believing that. Especially because it says best-selling game Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So I don't really believe that part. But what a banger soundtrack. We'll get into, let's get into some critting here. We'll kind of get started here. Question, did you ever go through a phase where you went back on everything except charcoal pencil drawings? Like, anxious to waste good product when you feel you need to improve the basics? Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had plenty of phases where I've kind of just stepped back to working again only in drawing, because drawing is just the best way to develop skills. Like I always will kind of draw for a long time and then be like, okay, I'm gonna start painting a bunch, and then paint a bunch and start to hit a wall, and then realize like, okay, I need to kind of work on some fundamental drawing skills, and so I'll take a step back and only draw for a long period of time. You really don't. There's a nice Bouguereau quote. Maybe I can even pull it up. There's a nice Bouguereau quote that says, like, the student's asking, he's asking Bouguereau if he can, who's his teacher, if he can stop drawing the model and start painting the model. And Bouguereau always says, like, one more year of drawing the model. Just do, like, a little bit more drawing the model, a little bit more drawing the model, because once you've, like, adequately drawing the model, you'll learn how to paint it in 2 weeks. Let me see if I can find that quote. That's not gonna be easy. I was just looking at it the other day. Me and Ramon are working on planning the portrait painting course that we're gonna do next as well. We're gonna have an oil painting course coming out, so that's why we have some of these quotes that we just pulled up the other day. Yeah, I don't know exactly where it went though. That's all right. Do you use a lacquer fixative on your charcoal sketches before you paint over them? Yes. Yep. Always just give it a little spray fixative and then start painting over it. You're good to go. Any ideas for a situation where you want to draw people without making them recognizable? Like, I draw realism, but I don't want their faces to be recognizable for privacy. If you're worried about that, then you should just get models that are okay with their faces being painted. It's kind of hard to paint people if you don't have a reference for painting people. It's kind of possible, but it's not possible in like a realist, like naturalist way, really, to like completely make up portraits. Everyone uses reference for pretty much everything, unless it's kind of stylized. Yeah, my wall exactly. Okay, very good. So everybody, we do a challenge every 2 weeks. This week's was to do this figure from a reference photo. I posted the reference photo. I do need to give a shout out to... this guy, Bryce Cameron Liston, BC Liston on Patreon. The guy, you can subscribe for $4 a month. There's thousands of reference photos on here that you can just directly download. You don't have to stay subscribed. You can download them, and then stop subscribing. And yeah, he's got lots of reference photos. He let me use one of these references for this challenge. I reached out to him, asked him if he was cool with that, and he was. I've used the reference photos for other videos in the past too. He's a nice guy. So, not sponsored or anything, but yeah, he posts good reference photos. So I do want to give BC Liston a shout out. We have this photo to draw from for this week. You could draw or paint it, do it however style you liked. And we had a whole bunch of submissions over here. Over 60 submissions that we had. And yeah, everything came out really well. A lot of nice stuff. Some big things I want to talk about here. Like I said, I've been reading a lot of 19th century history and stuff like that. And there's some things that I want to focus on with y'all that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about when they're teaching how to draw and paint the figure. So that are, very prevalent and kind of the standard teaching in the 19th century that, doesn't get talked about quite as much. So we're going to be talking about that a bunch today. Not every single person is going to get a personal draw over, a personal paint over. Maybe I'm going to even do less of those than, normal this time, because I kind of just want to talk about some big concepts. And the way this works is that generally you are lumped in from, the different categories that I kind of want to talk about. More fundamental things to work on at the top and less fundamental things that I want to talk about, more surface level details I want to talk about at the bottom. And so, if you see yourself in a category that, you don't like, then, it's not really a big deal. Not everyone that is right next to you is going to be, the exact same skill level as you are, but there are kind of general ideas that I do want to touch on that go from person to person, right? So that is the goal with how these things are lumped together. I will show you mine here real quick. I'm still working on it. What do you think about tracing from a photo? I got something for you. We're going to start off with that probably. I think maybe a portrait master copy for the next one. I haven't... How long did it take you to get good at drawing the figures? Drawing the figure? I've been drawing for about 7 years now, so... Hopefully 8. Hopefully 8. Let me show you my painting here. And get up... let me take it off the easel. We got a fixed charcoal drawing. So I spent about 4 or 5 hours on the charcoal drawing here. Fixed it down with spray fixative. This is just a piece of it's a linen primed canvas, just like a really cheap linen canvas. And it's 32 inches tall, 24 inches wide. That's a standard size for the ones done in the 19th century in the French École. So charcoal drawing, but just vine charcoal, that's it. Fixed it down. With spray fixative, and then start painting directly over it. The goal is to spend, work from top to bottom was generally the way it was done in, traditionally as well. That's mostly because you have a moving model. So, it's easy to draw, just ahead, kind of lock it into position with the drawing, and then try to paint it all in one day when, all the hair is in the same spot. And then you'd paint, the torso in one day, you paint the arms in one day, the legs in one day, a day to finish it up. They did it all in 6 days. I'll put it back up on the... They did it all in 6 days in the French Academy. You know, it's technically the École des Beaux-Arts. So you know, they had the figure and drawing, the people who did drawing and painting in the same classroom. And so they were 24 hours of model time a week, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. I believe it was broken up. The model would pose maybe 60 minutes on, 20 minutes off. So you get 4 hours of painting time a day or drawing time. You know, just the newer students draw, the older students paint. And even if you start painting, you still go back and draw sometimes. But they would spend 2 days drawing in the model. So that's 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours. You know, maybe they start painting a little bit in the second day, but spend 2 days drawing in the model. And then you have 4 more days to paint the entire figure. So it's actually incredibly fast, especially at that scale. It's a lot of efficiency. It is very big, but honestly, the thing is when you paint at this scale, even if you're painting like a figure, that head is still, you know, this big, right? Like that head is only this big. I'm using up a full size of paper. You know, there's almost no dead space on the top and bottom, which is something that's really important to the 19th century drawings and to me to try to imitate, is that I try to make sure there's almost no space at the top and bottom of the canvas. You know, maybe I could have even used that extra inch and really rode the hairline right to the top of the page, you know, with carefully planning it. That means the maximum size of the head is going to be this big. So, you know, if you're painting at half of that size, you're painting a head that's like this big. You can't really get that much detail on a head that's this big. So, you know, it takes a large canvas in order to, you know, really be able to have enough room to paint well. I think that's a really important detail to look into. Let me look at the. Did my chat freeze? Oh, there we go. No, it's 81 centimeters. 81 centimeters by I think like 50 centimeters wide. Jake, could you elaborate on why you're not a fan of Michael Hampton's art method teaching style? You know, the Hampton books are fine. I just find that they result in a lot of like really clunky, broken down, you know, analytical style figures that don't translate into very naturalist works. I love construction and constructive drawing. I just like, you know, I don't think that construction has to be kind of anti-naturalist. You know, everything is like super clunky and you know, boxes and cylinders and stuff. You know, it trains people, I think, it kind of abstracts anatomy and stuff away from the whole goal of what anatomy, you know, learning anatomy and construction is, which is to make stronger, more real-looking figures. And it kind of abstracts so far away from that sometimes that you wind up with, you know, really chunky stuff. You know, I used to do all that stuff back in the day. I don't really hate on it or anything like that. My drawings, you know, looked like that for a long time. And, you know, still do sometimes, so. I just find that people get so caught up in like the methods and the process of this stuff that they kind of forget like what the point of the techniques or the methods are. You know, they get really distracted by that. All right, let's get into these critiques here. Yeah, average academic drawing size 18 by 24, and then 32 by 24 for the paintings. So just a little bit bigger for the paintings, just because you kind of want that extra room when you're painting with like a brush. Yeah, draw. All right, let's make that layer there. I'm just gonna close this over here. You have the glass jar? Just one man and one jar, baby. It's gonna be a good stream. Gonna be a good stream. So there's a few different kind of concepts that I want to look at. I have a whole bunch of example images of paintings and drawings to talk to you guys about because I think there's just some gaps in the way that people approach this stuff. And, you know, every stream, I think that it's always important because there's always new people that are coming in and out of this, and always new people who are submitting and kind of working through the basics. You know, there's a lot of people here, every single stream starts to get repetitive for them, but, you know, that this is just the nature of learning art. There's not really a whole lot of super high-level art concepts that, like, you know, you have to be in art 332, I don't know how college classes work, in order to understand. There's really kind of a lot of these big basic ideas that you have to keep revisiting over and over and over and over and over again. And so, you know, you might have heard me say a lot of this stuff many times before, but I'm going to say it, you know, many times again, and you probably really need to hear it because I still need to hear it. So when we're looking at kind of these top 2 rows of figures, there's kind of one thing that I really specifically wanted to talk about, which is like measuring in proportion and accuracy in these. Now, I do this pretty much every single one of these streams. I do say this. I did say this at the last stream, but I'm going to say it again because it happens every time. I do want to say, guys, I really do discourage the use of tracing. I really do discourage the use even of the grid method. I don't like those things, and I will call people out every time that I see it because it's always very obvious. I love Halil Pasha. It's a crazy... Unless you're like, know me or Ramon and like you've seen us talk, probably Ramon talk about this image before. It's crazy to like see this drawing and know the name of the guy who did it. I actually don't even know what his professional work looks like. That's funny. I don't like the use of tracing because I don't think it builds the right mindset and skills. I also don't like, for the same reason, color picking, you know, color sampling with the eyedrop tool off of the reference to, you know, transfer the colors off of the reference directly on top of yours. So, you know, there's one in here that immediately, you know, and like I said, it's always obvious to see these when it happens, which is why I have to call it out every time. You know, I can, it's very easy to see sometimes when you layer some of these drawings that you guys submit on top of the reference. You know, it's like not even like, it's like perfectly accurate. And that's not, you know, some of you guys are going to be like, but Jake, you know, aren't they just really good and you're jealous that they're really good? That's not, you know, accuracy isn't, you know, exact photographic accuracy of matching every line in the same exact place and having every color, you know, again, by the way, like 33, 25, 97. 32, 20, 97. Like it's the exact, you know, it's just picked. It's sampled off and then put onto there. There's a 2% variance because they're using an airbrush, which, you know, has a soft radial gradient. You know, the purpose of what we do here isn't to try and, you know, take a photograph and reproduce it as well as possible. That's not the point of what, you know, I think realist drawing or art education is. The purpose of it is to really try to understand what we're looking at, to break down kind of fundamental ideas, to learn how to see properly, to learn how to do things in like the proper pacing, to, you know, be able to, the reason why we make, you know, drawings from photos is maybe you want to make a painting that's got, you know, some guy in some sort of like crazy position, you know, there's a horse about to run him over and he's like, right. You don't know how to draw that from imagination. Nobody knows how to draw that from imagination just right off the top of their head. So like what you do is you like ask somebody you know or look at yourself in the mirror or maybe even take a picture nowadays, right? Or get a model if you got it like that. And you want to learn how to make sketches from real living objects so that you can understand the mechanics of how things work in three-dimensional space. You understand how the arms move and rotate. You understand how to push things, how to stylize things, how to break things down into their fundamental components and their basic forms, and use that as like a fuel to, you know, embolden your own art. And I think when you take a study and then you just like trace it and then color pick it, like you're just, I don't, there's no like learning purpose, I don't think. You know, you're just spending a bunch of time recreating a photo without like, you know, any sort of, you know, practice color mixing, practice accuracy, practice like dividing things into groups, you know, practice working on your edges, practice working on your shapes. So that's why I really discourage, you know, color mixing, I don't discourage color mixing. I discourage tracing and color picking. because I don't think that they really conform to our idea of like what sort of benefits and what sort of ideas do we want to get out of this besides like posting an impressive drawing in the Discord. And yeah, I know they posted progress pics. I checked all the process pics. You know, every line is perfectly on top overlays, you know. It's easy to see, you know, even if you have somebody who is like a professional artist, their work doesn't just 100% perfectly line up, you know, even like from, if you took like these master 19th century artists, their work wouldn't just perfectly 100% line up exactly on top of the reference. And every color wouldn't just be 1% off, right? Because making art is about making decisions, making, decisions about how to group things, how to, set the saturation of different groups of things, where to choose your edges. You know, it's not just about conforming and copying the photo exactly. It's about looking at something and deciding what strategy do I want to take to get there. And so it's always obvious when somebody traces or color picks because it's clear that there was no strategy. It's just perfect accuracy, again, which isn't really our goal. How do you paint oils with skin without it looking grayish? I'll talk about some color mixing stuff with the later crits. Gonna have to talk a lot about drawing stuff here. Dick, can you roast me for actual flaws and not hallucinating a trace job? Yeah, okay. You're within 0% accuracy on every color. I recommend just mixing colors, make decisions. I just don't. Yeah, it's not what a single other person's piece of art looks like. I've done a lot of these, and I don't mean to. I just want to talk about the types, I don't care. You guys can go and do whatever you want in your own time, make art in whatever way you want, study in whatever way you want. That's all fine. But these are the types of values that I care about when it comes to, why traditional drawing education matters, why these ideas matter, and why, like, what's the purpose of even figure drawing in the first place? Is it just to draw like a bunch of, sexy naked girls or men or old, super old naked guys? Like, no, it's to like establish a practice of learning how to do and how to break down life so that you can apply those skills towards anything, and so that you have the skills. It's like going to the gym for your art, essentially, right? How do you count heads if you do it digitally? All right, I'm going to talk about that. So within this first, basically 2 rows of figures, there is like a decent variance of skill with a lot of these. But pretty much these first 2 rows, what I saw consistently with all of them is just some proportional stuff that I think has to happen. And that is measuring head heights, learning how to count heads, and a little bit about like center lines or plumb lines, motion of the figure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about rhythm when it comes to some of the later submissions. But I do want to talk just for the beginners here. The most basic ideas when we're setting up a drawing of any size, but I do recommend that we work, if you're going to do a figure drawing in traditional medium, 18 by 24 is a great size, just because, again, it seems huge, it seems vast, but then like a head on an 18 by 24 piece of paper is like the size of an egg, So at the end of the day, you really don't have that much space to work in. It is incredibly difficult, though. It is incredibly difficult to actually get like the proper proportions on an 18 by 24 piece of paper, because there is just a lot of space and it's really easy to get sucked into one spot and then to, lean back and sit back and realize that you got super sucked into like one specific small area. So you do have to kind of keep sitting back, keep checking your overall big things, and we'll talk about some strategies to break that down. Just wondering, did you deliberately choose this pose to be easy? 0 hands, only 1 foot, and cover my neck by hair. No, I think I chose a little bit deliberately this one because, well, one, I like the legs. The legs reminded me of some paintings I'm going to talk about with y'all in a minute here. But the legs reminded me of some of the rhythm and motion in this one. Also, it doesn't have any like super obvious genitals, which is like a little bit, makes me a little bit more comfortable with doing public crits and stuff like that. I think it is actually quite difficult, especially in like this area, because you have like kind of these somewhat foreshortened arms. And then, you know, you have like the neck is covered up and it feels like the head is floating. And that creates a lot of issues, especially just, it's very ambiguous where like the shoulder, neck, arm connection is. So it makes it quite difficult. So when we're starting out, when we're drawing, guys, 18 by 24 piece of paper, we really want to use up as much of the paper as possible. And there's a lot of you guys that I see, well, I see this where you don't include enough room for the feet. I'm going to show you guys how to plan for that. We're running the paper off of the side of the page. There's a bunch of, you know, this one isn't too bad, but certainly if you have a page, if you're going to do a long study, you know, more than just a couple minutes, then take up as much of the page as possible. There's some of you guys here, maybe I put somebody like a little bit lower. I remember somebody, maybe it's this one, like, think about too your composition, like, this is a really, really wide, big image. And we have like, you know, 80% of it is just like dead gray space, right? So if we're going to do a figure study, you know, I would choose a, you know, vertical or more, you know, less square canvas size. And I would try to crop it or, you know, do it traditionally. And really try to have that figure take up as much of the space as humanly possible. I did mine in MS Paint. That's awesome, buddy. I'm really proud of you. What was the hardest thing about figure drawing and painting for you? Well, I remember when I first started drawing like figures on like full 18 by 24 pieces of paper. I remember that it was really difficult in order to, I'm trying to move the chat around on my screen, I'm sorry. There we go. It was really difficult in order to position the figure on the page properly. I would always like run half of the figure off of the page or run, you know, extra head height off the page or somehow add in an extra head height or somehow subtract an extra head height even though I was counting. It just took me like a lot of drawings in order to just power through that. All right, you gotta stop. You gotta chill, brother. You teach me values. You come back in a little while when I've finished teaching values. I'm gonna teach you how to like value some patience in your life. So where we want to do this is we want to mark where the top of our drawing is going to fit and where the bottom of our drawing is going to fit, right? That's how we want the top of the head to be here. We want the bottom of the feet to be here. We really want to try to use up as much paper as possible, but it's okay to save yourself an inch or two on the top and bottom. You try not to do more than like an inch, inch and a half at the most, you know, just so that you have a little bit of extra space if you make a mistake. But the way we're going to try to not make a mistake, somebody said, how do you count head heights for a figure? Same way you do traditionally. Let me, you know, put your reference photo and then step back, you know, and hold out your pencil and thumb and count head heights using the comparative measurement pencil and thumb technique. Tried using a plumb line for the drawing, but I didn't count the heads. Yeah, you got to do both essentially. So what you want to do is you want to count one head height, right? 2 head heights. We're just going to see how many heads tall this figure is. 3 head heights. 2 head heights. 3 head heights. 4 head heights. 5. This is what you would be doing with your thumb and pencil. 6. 7, 8. I think I measured a little bit less than this. I measured like just under 8, I think, or ended up being like just about 8. It depends on how you take the head height and where you're counting from. Also, like the thickness of my lines is changing it a little bit. So without this, I measured 8. We're gonna go with that. What I did originally. Then you want to draw in a vertical line on your page. Nice, beautiful vertical line. And again, you want to mark out what you think is one head height. 1, 2, 3. You can use your thumb and pencil to transfer these down. 1, 2, 3, 4. I know this kind of sucks. It's like not the most expressive fun. You're not like gesture drawing. I'm you know, gesture maxing or whatever. But it's just like, if you're gonna spend 5 hours, 3 hours, 12 hours, 20 hours on a drawing, 2 hours, whatever, it's just worth spending like 10 minutes, 20 minutes doing this. If it's a big, you know, drawing, it might take you 20, 30 minutes. If it's a, you know, small one, it might take you 5 or 10 minutes. It's just worth it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm a little bit tall in these. That's fine. I'll just mark a slightly shorter one. Why are my controls? I had to hit Control Z like 35 times there. Let's try 1, 2. I'm just eyeballing these, but you use your thumb and pencil, or just, you know, like the length of your pencil in order to. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Very good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Very good. Okay, so there is where our figure is going to be. And now we know that like the figure is going to fit within this space, right? We know that the bottom of the foot is going to wind up on this line. Somewhere like this, right? We know the head. We also want to look at a plumb line. That's just a straight up and down line. If we take it from, you know, the pit of the neck normally is a good spot. It lines up with the pit of the crotch, and it lines up a little bit outside of the foot, right? Outside of the ankle, I mean. Right, so that's where the ankle's gonna be. We know that the head has to fit in this space. It's gonna line up on that plumb line. Tilts back. She's got a bit of cranium on her too. You know, the head's a little bit wider than it is tall. There's that cranium. That hair comes out a little bit. Is this incredibly, you know, I doubt I'm even making it look easy, but sometimes maybe I do make it look easy. Is this like, you know, it might look easy or it might look kind of boring. It is very engaging and it's very difficult. Like you're not gonna have a super easy time with this right away. This is something that takes a bit of practice. It takes a bit of a skill. You know, I'm always working on trying to make, you know, this stage of my drawing better. And I'm noticing kind of this big movement and rhythm that comes down the drawing too. Right, so we have this plumb line that comes out like this. I probably have like a little bit too much motion in here. Right? And so there's like the big movement and rhythm and accurate proportions of my drawing. And this is what really matters. I'm noticing that chin is to the right of the plumb line, so that's kind of important for me to put on there. Spending, you know, 20 minutes or so, and like taking your time to count this and measure this out, it just saves you every single one of these issues where, like, you know, the head is too big, you cropped the figure, you didn't have enough room for the figure, you know, also like kind of feels like the figure's leaning back, you know, because we don't have those feet in alignment with the head, right? If you want to stand up straight, this one looks good, like your feet have to your feet have to be under you if you want to stand up and not fall over. If your feet were back here, you'd topple over. This one, you know, feels reasonably aligned. I think the plumb line on this one is good, but look how tall she feels, right? Just because this figure is, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm probably giving a little bit extra. Maybe 6, 7. I think I measured a little bit extra on here. It's probably like an extra head tall. I'd say this figure is probably about an extra head tall, or a little bit more than that. Maybe even like 3/4 of a head tall. And just making her head a bit bigger on something like this would like drastically improve the drawing, right? And it's just something that has to be done. Boom. Like it just makes the drawing feel so much more proportionate. And it's just something that you have to double check. You have to count it out early, and you have to check a few times during the process to make sure you didn't fall off of that. This stinks, but not as bad as making, yeah, measuring your head heights might not be as, you know, fun as like being super expressive and, you know, slapping charcoal powder down on the page with your fingers and spreading it around, you know, and doing some sort of rhythmic dance. But like the feeling of making a drawing that you like work super hard on and then you take a step back from it and you're like, oh, that actually sucks. That's the worst feeling ever. And it's really easy to avoid. And when you count head heights, you actually do intuitively get better at this stuff too. It takes a long time, but you do intuitively get better. And you should, like, you know, when you're counting the head heights, like guess and check, right? Like you should say like, I think this figure, you know, I think it's, you know, you can kind of count it with your head, count it with your finger, you know, divide this line just with your finger and with your head and into, you know, 8 equal divisions or 7.5 equal divisions, whatever it may be, you know, and then check it with your pencil and make sure that you're getting it right. You know, that's how you build intuitive skills. Trying to get the right angle of the model's contour. What do you think of aligning the charcoal stick or the pencil with the angle and then holding it against the paper and then drawing that line? That's exactly what you should be doing all the time. Yeah, I think that's a really great, when you're looking for big angles, which we'll kind of talk about in a second here, it's a great, you know, I'm always holding my pencil up, looking at that angle, you know, aligning it, putting it onto my paper, especially with like difficult, like sometimes when something's coming right at you, it's really hard to like, what is this angle? You know, like it's hard to align it when I'm in reverse. It is this angle, but like it's kind of hard to pull this sort of weird angle when something's coming right at you. It can be difficult to see what that would translate into in 2D. So that's where holding your pencil up and matching that angle just in your eyes can be really helpful. So what I'm seeing with like all of these is either like, you know, like head too small, you know, also the feet's really far forward. The head's so far behind the feet that she's kind of toppling over backwards, right? No feet, you got to put the feet on there. You know, there's some nice stuff here, but again, like the feet too far back, they're not aligned on the plumb line, and the head's feeling like a little bit big, which is making her feel short. You know, again, kind of head too big, so it makes her feel, you know, she might only be like 4.5 heads tall. That's kind of the size of like maybe a toddler or something like that. And that's kind of why she feels extremely short. And this one, you know, here, like maybe this one might work out to be the right amount of head heights. Let's check. It's like 1, 2. Not really the most accurate way to count. 1, 2, just by eye. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think just the legs are a little bit short. I think you're about like half a head height short on the legs, which is like something that happens a lot, you know, like it's a really easy mistake to make. You know, I was a little bit off. I think actually, yeah, I was like maybe half a head off after I counted, you know, and it's like, it's an adjustment that I make later on. You kind of have to like step back. Like this looks so much better now. You kind of just have to step back or take a break and come back to it, spend a few sessions on it, go get a cup of coffee after, you know, 30 minutes of drawing, and then come back and make sure that all of your alignments are right, that your feet are in the right spot under the figure. What about a pose that's not standing upright? It's the same thing. You know, your figure might be 4 heads if they're sitting down because, you know, the legs get foreshortened. right? Like if you have, and this is where head heights are actually especially useful, because it's not as hard to get somebody who's standing up, right? You know, maybe you have somebody who's, it's a trick for this actually. Take a line, you divide it in half, you divide it in half, you divide it in half. I just divided that line into eighths. Not super accurately, but something like that, into eighths. Now here's my figure. My high fashion, modern design figure. Some feet. Some hands, right? If this guy goes, he's standing up right now, he's 8 heads tall. If this guy goes to sit down, all that's gonna happen is this top portion of his legs, right? Top portion of the leg, this is where the knee is, right in here. That's going to rotate up and face directly towards us if he's gonna sit down. And so it's gonna get foreshortened so much that it's pretty much gonna disappear. And we're just gonna see his knees like right here. Right? And now we have a guy who's sitting down. And that's it, right? But like it can be really confusing sometimes looking at this. Next a little bit lower than that. It can be really confusing sometimes looking at this. And that's where counting head heights is really, really helpful, especially, you know, if you have somebody, this is like an insanely difficult pose to draw. You will always mess this up if you don't count head heights. Doesn't matter how good you are. Which really is kind of the case for like most, any sort of long form figure drawing. If you don't like count head heights to some extent, like you're pretty much always you always have a much higher chance of messing it up. But like, let's say you have a figure who's laying down. Right, you're gonna have like crazy foreshortening sometimes on this stuff. Where like, they might only be, it's like the top of their head, right, their ear, whatever. There's their rib cage, their waist, their knees, and their feet, you know, and their arms right here. This guy might only be a head height and a half tall. That's where measuring head heights is really, really helpful in cases of foreshortening or sitting down or bending over or stuff like that. You can still do all the same stuff. You know, it doesn't matter. The actual it being a head height that we count isn't actually really all that important. It's just heads don't change that much from person to person, right? Like even if you have somebody who's like, you know, has like actual like dwarfism or something, like their heads are still reasonably close to like, you know, standard normal adult head size because we have to like contain our brains in them. And so head heights don't vary, like, or head size doesn't vary like a massive amount, but somebody can have like femurs that are like, you know, somebody's legs can be way longer than somebody else's legs. You know, head heights do vary a lot, and you can have people that are, you know, generally from like 6 to 8.5 heads. But still that variance isn't as great as most of the rest of the body. But you can still measure how tall people are in any sort of relative measurement, right? Like if you wanted to count like how many, you know, brachioradialis muscles, which is like this muscle right here that's bunching up, tall this lady is, like, be my guest. It's just like, heads are like a nice size that's like reasonably consistent, that it's easy to do, and it makes sense for us because, you know, we're humans and we pay attention to heads. If you're laying down, where do you put the plumb line? You know, a plumb line is just like a straight up and down line. So like you might you know, hold up a plumb line if you have a physical one, or just hold up your pencil straight up and down to like check where like the edge of the arm is relative to the foot or something. If you're drawing like a pose like this on some paper or whatever, it's like super foreshortened, which, you know, a pose can look even more foreshortened than this. I remember Ramon has a great foreshortened drawing on his page. Let me grab it. This is Ramon Hurtado, by the way. He's the guy who teaches my course with me on halftonestudio.art. Did he take it down? Maybe he replaced it. It was a really nice drawing. Oh no. Maybe it's on his Instagram. One second. But like a plumb line might not be, you know, that helpful. I mean, it's just a straight up and down line. You can put it wherever you want, but it might not be super helpful if you're, you know, your drawing is only like this tall because it's only a head height and a half tall. Damn, I'm gonna have to, I might not be able to find this for shortened drawing. I don't want to spend, I'm the type of guy that if like I start looking for something, I just get like so obsessed with finding it, especially when it comes to like finding, you know, a specific piece of artwork that I'm looking for in my head, that I will just search for something for like an hour and a half straight. And it's like not a productive use of time at all, but I just like get really fixated on finding it. And I don't want to do anything else until I find it. And I'm trying not to do that to you guys right now. Oh, you know, here's a nice example that Ramon posted at least. This one isn't his drawing, it's by Ivor Hele. I'm switching the screen to it now. You know, so like this head is only, or this drawing is, you know, if we want to say this is like a head height to like the bottom of her jaw maybe. It's probably like 1, 2, 3, maybe 3.5 heads tall. You know, and maybe you would want to put a plumb line, you know, down the center of her body, but you don't have to always put a plumb line in. You know, you can just kind of check your plumb lines and angles and stuff like that as you go. Better to use cranium instead? Yeah, it doesn't matter. You know, there's a billion different systems for measurements. I use cranium sizes as an additional set of measurements on top of head heights. But neither one is better. They're just conform to different things. You know, again, you can use the relative size of anything you want. Are you gonna ever invite Ramon on a live stream again? Yeah, I talked to him about this challenge a little bit. I didn't invite him on the stream. You know, right now I'm just trying to focus on a bunch of stuff, so it can be a lot to kind of coordinate stuff. But I should have him on. Maybe I'll have him on like the next one or something. We'll do like I think I'm thinking of like a Danyan master portrait copy or something. If I can find a good resolution image, I'd love to do maybe that for a challenge, and I'm sure Ramon would be happy to come on. He's also doing a studio sale soon too, because he's moving to Paris in a couple months. The average human being is 150 pinky toes tall, but they won't tell you that in your college. That's a joke, but I found this old like 18th century or 17th century book where they used minutes as sizes of they called them minutes, where they're sizes, and they were literally like a thumb tip tall, and they had the entire figure marked out in these like 100+ minute measurements. Maybe not 100+, but it was at least 40 or something down the body. It was insane. I have no idea. It's just absurd stuff. So the reason why I want to focus on like the composition, this overall size of the figure, this type of stuff, is because I think these are the things that are really important. And it's kind of where a lot of drawings go wrong is not getting the feet in the right position, not grounding the figure, not getting the right sense of balance, which often really just comes from kind of balancing the center line of the masses, where these things are. And almost all of you guys here, like 20+ drawings, could easily be vastly improved with just like 20 or 30 more minutes of just precautionary measures at the beginning, you know? And some of these are pretty darn close. Like, you know, all these drawings are like nice, actually. You know, there's a lot of nice things going on in them. There's just some stuff I would double check, you know, with the head feeling a little bit big. And we'll talk about some other strategies for that. Making sure we get the feet on the page and we have good alignment. You know, it's pretty much that for all of these. Head being a little bit small. This bottom half of the figure feels really long. You just feel like really long, skinny legs. So you kind of just want to be able to take a break sometimes, come back to your drawing, look at your reference, look at your model, and just think like, you know, what's the difference between my drawing and the model? Well, my legs feel like really skinny. My legs feel skinny and longer than the model. You know, in general, my drawing feels much taller than the model. You know, why is that? Well, maybe I just didn't make things thick enough, or maybe the legs are just too long. Recount your head heights. You know, maybe try widening up some areas of your drawing. You know, looking at kind of the big exterior angles of things. And that's the case for like all of these, I would say. I don't know exactly why this guy added a washing machine to this. I'm curious of the storytelling. He's also saying frowny face, so maybe she stubbed her toe on the washing machine, and now she's upset. Women don't have to be washing clothes, actually. They can do whatever career they like. And, you know, that's just the type of ally that I am. Women don't be washing. We've moved on as a society. Oh, to explain the lack of clothes. You're right. Because everybody strips down naked on laundry day. Because I put my one pair of underwear that I own, that I've worn for the whole week, into the wash, and then I just walk around naked until it's ready. So, before I extend like a little bit into, I did censor some of these, by the way, the process of drawing and some of these skills. I do want to just look at some 19th century artworks here and talk about like what the big difference is that I'm seeing in your guys' drawings that I think could really be improved by, you know, looking at some of this and understanding kind of these ideas and principles that are, you know, not even incredibly complicated to apply, but it's just a different sort of thinking, a mindset and approach to it. A big inspiration for what I, you know, a big inspiration for me lately has been this painting here. And this is from, it looks like from the 90s, 94 in Academy Julian. That's where Bouguereau, Lefebvre, Fleury taught. Laurens also taught there. J.C. Laurens, Joseph Constant Laurens, I believe. And, you know, what's really beautiful to me about this image, one is like, you just don't see a lot of figure drawings like this that aren't in like some sort of dark, dingy dungeon academy room. But are in this beautiful open air light, these big studio windows that have this really fresh sense of color that's also very unified, very naturalistic. It feels very round. It doesn't feel like, you know, some sort of Lucian Freud where all of the, I can pull up a Lucian Freud figure painting. It doesn't feel like all the tones are clashing and fighting each other. Let me grab a little Lucian Freud. You know, this is like, you know, Lucian Freud's an interesting painter. His paintings are like kind of sexual. We can tank it though. You know, the thing about like a Freud, YouTube don't ban me. Maybe they'll age restrict it. It's censored. I censored it on camera. The thing with like a Freud is that like, and this is actually like not even a bad painting for him, is that his tones are just often extremely clashing. The halftones are essentially what I would say is, you know, is disunified, right? Like these halftones are very dark. It feels like some of the dark tones kind of spill out into the light areas, which kind of flattens the light logic. You know, these are maybe intentional choices by Freud, or stylistic if you want to call it that. But what's really beautiful to me about like kind of naturalist painting and 19th century painting in general is like this incredible degree of unity that feels very integrated, feels very 3D, realistic, fleshy. You know, it's not about making things look soft. It's really about kind of this integration of each part knitted into each other in order to feel very volumetric, very lifelike, you know, in a way that like a Freud is just not gonna get there. It feels much more like a painting of somebody, especially when, you know, stuff like this that's like highly, highly disunified. And so that's really beautiful to me. And there's another aspect of this too that I think is really interesting. And that's like just the beautiful rhythm of these contour lines. Like this is just, it's a type of poetry really. How this line comes down and they just feel like they're weaving in and out of each other. Especially like, look at this back of the leg here, right? We're coming down, we're coming in on both sides, the hamstring muscles. and we're sliding in, and then this calf is pulling out of here. It's extremely, extremely rhythmic, and it doesn't feel broken up. It's not, I see a lot of kind of academy drawings nowadays, in, modern ateliers and stuff like that. They start their drawings like this, and I'm not the biggest fan of that, because you can't technically arrive at all of like the levels of accuracy by doing this. It just takes more time. This is like some really good draftsmen start drawings like this. But to me, you can get all the angles right. You can get everything perfectly accurate, but you'll never achieve the sort of like rhythmic poetry that these artists have, with these kind of long flowing lines that very neatly overlap each other, that pull in and out of each other. That also, it feels just like a spiraling. It's the meat braid, essentially. And everything, even if there is no anatomical connection between, I don't know, like this arm and this butt, and then down here, it still feels like it was meant to flow like that. It gives your eyes places to move, and it's really fascinating. Bro's painting from a photo. This was a live model pose at Academy Julian, so no photos here. Oh, well, you're talking about Freud. Yeah, never mind. And I think that's just like a type of quality that you see in 19th century paintings and artworks in general that like really gets forgotten about. And somebody asked me like why I don't like Michael Hampton earlier. It's not that I even dislike this guy, but I just don't like a lot of modern drawing education, because I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about that rhythm. Or when they do talk about rhythm or gesture, they talk about like making drawings from like these like flowing lines like this. And it starts to get kind of like really abstracted from what the model looks like too. Like they kind of lose touch with the model. And so like you get these drawings that are very overly constructed or very overly gestural. And I think neither of them really kind of achieve their purpose of, really trying to find like what is beautiful in the model's image. Is it bad to draw from photos? No. And, again, like the same sense of like weaving and stuff, of flow, of rhythm, it's in all these 19th century drawings. It's like the most important thing to them. And every line like always just moves and weaves and knits into the next one. We create these like beautiful spirals of motion in everything that we do, even in, again, like these are our quicker model studies. I wouldn't be surprised if these were probably under an hour. These are probably like 20-minute, maybe 40-minute drawings. I found these on eBay, by the way. They're just some random 19th century. I have the name of the guy who did them, but he's not super well known. Some like German artists from like the late 19th century. And, even just in these sketches, like there's just so much motion, and they're also fast and beautiful, and they don't rely on like, again, a bunch of setup and construction and like boxes and cylinders and all that stuff. All that stuff is incredibly well understood, but everything kind of yields like, again, to like creating these feelings of flow and weaving and balance and rhythm. And I think it's kind of like maybe an alternative approach to, it's an alternative approach that isn't talked about quite as much nowadays. And that any sort of drawing technique that relies on like looking at a reference and trying to like, okay, I get this angle right, and then I get this angle right, and then I get this angle right, this angle, and then this, this, and you're like getting all those angles right. You're using, sight size or something. Any sort of drawing education that teaches this, I think fundamentally will never be able to approach kind of this type of naturalism or rhythm in a drawing. It's a totally different mindset, and it's not how they trained back in the 19th century. Do you need to know much anatomy of this kind of rhythm? I think like you kind of need to know some level of anatomy. Knowing the directions of the muscle fibers and stuff. There's kind of always, as a beginner, you're always going to learn like a ton of really technical stuff. And then you're going to get really like stiff. And then you have to spend a lot of time distancing yourself from all the technical stuff. I think a lot of people maybe can relate to, as they are learning, they learn as you're learning something as a beginner, you learn all the most complicated technical things. You want to impress your mom, you want to impress your friends, you want to show people that you're a serious artist. So you learn about the coracobrachialis and the connection to the brachialis, and you learn about the glenoid process and the connection points for the biceps and the triceps. And the triceps have 3 heads: the lateral head and the long head and the medial head. And there's that one Michelangelo muscle around the extensor digitorum carpi longus or whatever, extensor digitorum, something like that. And you learn about all these technical things. And there's some sort of like merit to that. There was a time where I did that, and I made a bunch of like anatomy tracing drawings of like where I would draw the bones, and I used tracing paper and layered the anatomy, muscles on top of it. And I learned how to draw, diagrams and stuff like that. There's some level of that stuff that is somewhat helpful and important, but a lot of it is kind of trying to prove yourself as an artist, trying to, be serious, trying to lock in and learn. And I think that we can learn these things in a little bit more of a graceful way. And it also just takes time to integrate these ideas. So you do have to learn like a decent amount of anatomy, but not all at once. And you can kind of learn like the big form ideas, the big ideas. Yeah. And, even in, this is like an early 19th century sketch, like 1830s or something, I can't remember exactly. But like, these guys, they understood construction really well, actually. They did understand, anatomy, construction, building things from forms, but they were kind of combining it with more of these gestural or rhythmic or simpler drawing ideas. You can see very easily, this sort of egg-shaped contour outline here. We have like this bowl-shaped pelvis. You can see how like the obliques. You see how the obliques slide in here. You can see a center line down the chest. You can see this cylinder form coming in like this, right? The cylinder going down and back. These legs are kind of noodly, but all the parts of the legs are there. The sartorius muscle overlapping. So like all the construction is in these, but like it doesn't have to look insanely constructed, right? It doesn't have to look like everything is like outlined and drawn from boxes, and we have to like 3-dimensionally place the figure in space and all that stuff. One more thing, Ramon posted about this on his story the other day, and we were having a chat about it before, and he showed these to me years ago in one of his classes. But I did want to pull it up because it's very interesting. And I will find... Where did we put those? I'm on the wrong page. There it is. I'll pull it up on the screen. In just a second here. Here it is. So, Ramon posted about this on his story the other day, but if you don't follow him on Instagram, I want to show you guys. That's just the same picture of Lucian Freud I already posted. Copy. Copied? There we go. There's this guy named Raimundo Madrazo. He's a really great painter. His dad, he's actually like a 3rd-generation painter. I think his grandfather was a portrait painter. His dad was a painter, a history painter, portrait painter. No, he's a portrait painter too. And then Raimundo Madrazo became a painter. Very wealthy, extremely well-trained from a very young age. This guy was just a god. And this old article from an old newspaper or magazine was titled like "A God of Art Comes to Town" or whatever. Because Raimundo would, travel around to different towns, and as, he would go to these different towns, they'd set up a portrait for some wealthy person. He'd do a portrait for them in like a week, and then he'd move on to the next town or whatever, right? Traveling portrait painter. And so they'd always be kind of these big articles that would promote him. And they actually took photos of him doing this for this article. And we have some process photos of this really old painter, which is like insanely cool. And there's just something that's like really, and we'll zoom in on that in a second here. Let me just pull the last photo in. Okay. Please copy. Copy as PNG. There we go. And I think when people think about like construction and form and stuff, you know, again, they start thinking about like all these boxes and cylinders and stuff, but we can see that like Raimundo actually, again, just did a pretty loose charcoal drawing. This guy is like goated beyond belief, right? Like this is what the painting came out as. So like, don't be lazy because of what I'm about to tell you. This guy is like, he is goated beyond human comprehension of anyone alive at this time. Like this guy is just third generation, like insanely good Spanish portrait painter, one of the best, you know, to ever live. And there's a reason why he could, you know, do this type of artwork in a week. But, you know, these charcoal drawings are very loose, very scratchy. You know, you can see like these hands are like, look at this, right? Like not very substantial. This guy understood form. He understood construction. If we look at this one too, there's another one by him that also had photos. Right, like we understand construction. Sorry, this guy understands construction, but he doesn't have to like square off of the wrist and then like, you know, connect this and like find the bone or whatever. Like also you can build volumes and masses. You can build volumes and masses by just understanding them and build it all entirely within the contour. And this is how like a lot of 19th century stuff works, right? Just there's this egg-like form in here. It's squared off where the elbow is. Egg-like form. And then we're slotting in to this boxy shape of the wrist, right? And so there's like an incredible amount of form and construction, even though these are just very simple, sketchy lines. Just because this guy has a really strong understanding of how to control those lines, how to control the overlaps. Yeah, it's just absolutely insane. And then they would also, you know, again, work directly. And, you know, the idea for this stuff, this portrait is absolutely massive. But the idea for this stuff is that you would finish, you know, the head in one sitting or one day or whatever, maybe a couple days. But it says in this article that his goal was to do the head. And then as soon as the head is done, there's no retouching. So you don't do the dress or block in the whole thing and then come back up and like reunify the head after and, you know, rework everything. He would just do the head to this level in one pass and then do this in one pass and then do this in one pass and then do the ability to do that without, you know, again, reunifying things all the time and constantly coming back is literally insane. But that was how everyone was trained at the time. I saw a modern atelier student doing a wedding portrait full length, but she made the bride pose for 167 hours. That has to be rage bait. It has to be the wedding painter. Wedding painter rage bait is the most booming business on social media. There is no better way to get views on social media than to tell yourself that you're a wedding painter that just charged the client $7,000 for like the worst painting ever. There's no way you can ever make a real human person sit for 167 hours. That must have taken like 2 years of them like posing. That is so crazy. I'm a wedding painter and I charged $8,000 for this, but I still feel like it wasn't enough. Easiest 1 million views on Reels you'll ever get in your life. It's a booming rage bait business. But even the modern atelier approach still works. It kind of works. Why must we stick? Is Lime Students like Barry Evil? That makes amazing. Yeah, I know Barry Evil. I know Jude. I met him in person. He's a really nice guy. Really great artist. I'm not saying you have to do anything, by the way. But I think the major downside with modern approaches is time. Yeah, like the ability to execute. The ability to execute one of these drawings in a single week in only 12 hours, or one of these paintings in 24 hours in a single week, it just trains people to be able to do stuff, like this, right? It trains you to be able to do this. And that sort of efficiency just can't be had if you spend 200 hours on a cast drawing or 200 hours, copying one of these figures. It's a completely different mindset. And there are, people who make, amazing works, out of GCA, out of Lime. But it's a different mindset, it's a different philosophy, and you won't arrive, just don't go to those schools expecting to come out, painting like this, or painting like this, because it's not the same stuff. And I think it's especially apparent when it comes to like narrative work, right? To compositional work with multiple figures, environments, people interacting. That's where I think that system, which can hold up for figures and portraits and still lives and stuff like that really well, and make good results, really beautiful results with a lot of time. But very, very, very few atelier painters, go on to make narrative work. There's a handful. Eric Drummond from Florence makes some really nice stuff. Yeah, like, again, like this is a 24-hour drawing. This is a 12-hour. This is a 12-hour, I believe. This is probably a 12-hour too. And then, again, these are like less than an hour. This is probably 10 minutes. And then these are 24-hour paintings. And they're big too. They're 32 inches. They're as big as my painting back here. So these are some of these concepts that I want to see in you guys. And I'm going to keep coming back to this stuff, but especially what I want to talk about with a lot of you guys. To forbid digital art for a challenge, I think it just excludes a bunch of people from doing the challenge. Like if people want to do trad, then they'll do trad. Doing trad only just means like half, a third of the amount of people will just do it, unfortunately. Do any of the old masters use Ibis paint? Yeah. Is bottom right figure done for the Prix de Rome? This one's a Prix de Rome. Because to do the Prix de Rome, it's like the American Idol or whatever, right? Prix de Rome is a big art competition, where the painters make, these big, paintings, compositional paintings, but they have like runoff competitions in order to choose like the top 10 or 12, I think. And then those are the people that actually make the narrative paintings for the final exhibition, final judging. So the runoff competitions are, the first initial composition sketch, and then they have like a full figure drawing, I believe, and then they have a full figure painting. They might have done a portrait painting too, in order to like run off competitors. And so they did this in 1 week. I think they did 4 hours a day. Yeah, I think for one of these. 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, yeah. I feel like they did maybe even 2 of these in that week or something. I feel like for some reason in my mind, I have that they would paint like 6 or 8 hours a day for one of those. So I can't remember, but yeah, this is by Dagnan, by the way. Dagnan, Pascal Dagnan Bouvrot, who I've been reading about a lot. This guy, he's just like beyond goated. I mean, it's just like truly beyond goated. And you're doing it all, wet into wet, whatever. No layers, no glazing in 1 week. What are we here for? We're here for the composition stream. Yeah. Not competition. Composition. Figure drawing. I've kind of lost my mind already at this point. We're only like an hour into the stream. But I think that those important, it's just like, I think it's equally important to get across kind of these big ideas, right? It's equally important to get that stuff across and to show you guys these examples as it is to like, it's actually way more important to do that stuff than to be like, oh, your legs are too short. Next. It feels like, oh, your legs are too short. Next is like a more helpful thing. But really, like, you do have to spend a lot of time like looking at people that are better than you, looking at their art closely, asking yourself what materials did they use, and more importantly, what type of training did they have? How did they execute those? What sort of conditions? How did they think? What did they talk about? What type of artists did they like? You have to look at that stuff. It's far more important for your growth to do that than it is to like get specific little tips. You think digital is worse for learning than trad? Not really, but when it comes to like a lot of this figure drawing stuff, I think trad is like I think it is a little bit better, yeah, for learning. But there's a lot of different ways you can learn, and like it's not really the end of the world. But if you do like traditional art, 19th century painting and figure drawing and stuff like that, you should do it traditionally if you like that stuff. It's just a better way to learn it. Doing it on digital is just like nowhere near as effective, I think. Okay. So still like a lot of head height stuff in this brush is crazy. I didn't even mean to switch to that. Still a lot of like head height stuff within here, but starting to get a little bit more accurate beyond this point. And there's actually some nice stuff happening in these. Like this is a nice trad drawing. Looks like charcoal and stump. Like this is nice. I like some of like the treatment of the tones in here. And I think that like where we can improve this type of stuff is within that drawing stage. Is caring about some of those principles of drawing. Like, don't, you know, what I want to encourage you guys is not to work everything tonally. You know, remember how powerful your line is. And let me just take black up here. And, you know, we could improve the head heights, maybe tilt the head back a little bit more. Just the figure, I think, needs to be lengthened in general. You know, that's starting to look a little bit better. Maybe your head just feels like a little bit large to me. Small though, maybe just like wide or something. Maybe there's like some plumb line too. I would just check plumb line. Plumb line. You know, not bad. Not bad, I think, at all. But like the power where I'm really seeing a lot of these issues with like pretty much all of your guys' art is, I think, understanding the power of those rhythmical connections between things. So let's pick a good spot here. I think a lot of the action and the motion of this pose is in a few different areas. I really like the hips and the legs in here. But also a lot of the action of the pose is kind of this torso. A lot of the action of the pose is also within this torso here. And the hips as well. And they kind of are slanting different ways. And they're clashing into each other, right? And so from yours, I want to make sure that, you know, I really feel that feeling as well. And one part of that is the obliques that go alongside side of us, side of our hips here, on both sides, right in here, and create this bowl shape where the hips insert into, right in here. And these obliques are coming up and in, and then they're clashing into the back here, which is getting cut off. And so I think it's important to have, you can just use your Conte pencil, your charcoal pencil, and make sure this comes up and over and intercepts that. And then this comes out, and again, there's like these nice hooking rhythms here. This is coming out, and this is just the glute medius. This is that upper glute muscle. That's coming in, it's breaking that contour a little bit. And then look where it's flowing down to. It's flowing very naturally down this top group of our muscles, the top group of our quads right in here. So I want to make sure that that's flowing down. And when I pull this line, I want to just think about it, or even, you know, you can literally draw it in lightly if you want. I just want to think about this coming up and connecting up to here, right? Likewise here with the butt, we have this glute maximus muscle, this bottom muscle, and this is coming, and it really does feel like it's hooking in a little bit. And maybe it's even lacing over to the other side to where we're getting this protrusion over here on top of the knee. And when you're doing this, thinking about how things connect from side to side, the angles that they do, the ways that they flow into each other, I think that it's an easy way too to catch a lot of proportional things. So when I'm doing this, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing this kind of angle, this sort of flow, and I'm looking here and it just feels like, I think we're like a little bit short within the legs, you know? So that's fine, right? Like, it's something we'd want to check a little bit earlier on. We're just like that. It's a small adjustment, right? But it makes a big difference. And likewise, too, we have the top of the quad in here. It's coming up. Maybe that's kind of lacing into this oblique group that's coming and cutting off of here. And so you can grab your Conte pencil. It doesn't have to be quite this dark. But making little dark accents here along the side, where things overlap, it really does help push that feeling of motion, and it helps separate things out and not feel so stiff or only relying on the tonality of the drawing. And also, you know, a reason why we do these figure drawings is to prepare ourselves to paint figures, right? And to prepare ourselves for sketching, you know, doing quick sketches too, to work on our proportions, to work on our preparatory sketches for making maybe larger paintings of figures in dynamic positions and stuff like that. So we do these in order to give ourselves that fuel. So by notating stuff like this in these drawings, it helps us understand these connections better, which, you know, will have long-term dividends that will pay us off later when we're working on those exercises. Right. So, first time using Vine charcoal? Oh, that's great. Yeah, you can. You know, I always use a soft charcoal for my drawings, but I am trying to improve kind of the linear qualities of my charcoal drawings, not just I think everyone kind of relies on just the tonality of them as they're first learning, but you know, these are kind of the big structural ideas that you want to improve. And you can use the Conte pencil to kind of hit these accents in. You can also just get like a medium hard Vine charcoal too, and it's really great for sketching as well. So, you know, what's the angle that connects these? You know, something like this, right? That's great. You know, and then we're bumping this out, especially if you're going to paint over it too. It's easy just to bump this stuff out naturally. And how does this like stretch and grow off of this? You know, all this feels like pretty good, right? Like, I don't think you're far off on any of this stuff at all. Maybe just like this hip needs to come out like a little bit more. And I think too, well, I know too, when you look at a lot of like unfinished, let me grab another image real quick. École paintings. And again, this is very easy fuel to use as being lazy or making bad decisions. So I'm saying this with a grain of salt. Oops, I gotta open the folder. And there's another one I want. I have one in my folder. Let me grab it real quick. Assets, reference. My unsorted folder, which has been unsorted for a very long time. I found this one on eBay. Funny enough, by a guy who became like a super modern kind of impressionist painter. His paintings were terrible. They're really not great. Allow me to just, boom, no nudity anymore. When you look at the under drawings of these, you do see kind of like lots of long lines being pulled. In many cases, these lines like missing too a little bit or being carried like over. This guy is relining that charcoal, reestablishing the charcoal drawing with like a brown thin line. This is like a lot more precise actually. When you look at one like this is a decent academic painting. It's a solid academic painting. Like, this is crazy messy, crazy hairy. You know, generally you find like the messiness kind of in between like this and this, where you'll see like, even if you zoom in on the drawings too, you'll see oftentimes like the outside contour kind of looks like this. You know, and there's a difference between doing that and doing like doing this. I think a lot of it is just like the length of the line and the confidence. It's totally okay to do a line like this and like kind of miss. It's much better than doing like this and like you have no idea where you're gonna go, right? If you do a bunch of longer lines, you know, maybe you're just kind of like generally handling the contour of something very smoothly and rhythmically like this, you know, it's easy to come in here and then like establish out the bumps of the contour and make it all flow into each other, you know, nicely and properly. But if you're doing it really scratchy like this, it becomes just kind of a mess in order to make it flowing and nice and smooth. And this is advice that, you know, Ramon gave me, but I've heard in a lot of teachers say, and it's something that I should remember a lot, like it's nice to break stuff down into angles, which you didn't even do, you know, I think this is like reasonably well handled. But sometimes on certain areas, even where there's like a harder angle between where two areas are clashing into each other, after you kind of establish those angles like this, you can basically like take a little bit of clay, like, you know, think of yourself putting like a little bit of clay into this area and just smoothing it out like a little bit. Smoothing out the transition to not be quite a super hard angle. And that's just kind of general advice that I'm just throwing out there. I don't even think you did that like particularly poorly or anything. Yeah, this drawing is it's very well handled actually. You know, improving your contour and finding little areas where kind of these muscles do overlap and flow into each other will help a lot. As well as some value advice that I'm going to give to somebody else. I'm going to move on. Your colors look very accurate here, but you know, again, it's a head height measuring thing, and I think the head kind of winds up looking a little bit pushed forward here because of the fact that, you know, there's a lot of hair here, and so it ends up causing it to look very pushed forward, which makes it feel strange, right? So we do have to just remember. This is why we need to kind of understand the basic forms of things. Because we do have this rib cage in here. It's approximately like this, right? Rib cage is like an egg shaped like this. We have a center line that goes down. That center line is going to come down the middle of the rib cage and bump out on the belly to go to the belly button like this. And down to the middle of the pubic bone. And at the top of this rib cage, we're going to have the neck that comes out. And so where this chin is right here, it just kind of feels like it has to really like jut forward and push out a lot in order to get there. And simply just by taking this and moving it back, I think it would improve a lot. The whole figure I think is a little bit tall too, but that really helps balance out the flow and the rhythm. So try to think about where is this, even if you can't see it, where's the pit of your neck? Where's your center of, you know, where is your neck underneath all of that hair? How is it going to connect to those shoulders? You know, don't just copy the angles that you see, because it's kind of impossible not to mess up one angle and then, you know. And then, you know, have some sort of big mistake. Kind of more head measuring stuff in both of these with the legs, leg height. Okay, so now I can kind of talk a little bit more about rhythm stuff. And also a little bit about value stuff. I kind of want to talk about color too. Kind of some plumb line issues here with like the feeling of balance. Just need to use kind of a plumb line in order to understand where your feet need to be positioned. It's another charcoal one that's kind of interesting. It's a lot of the same crits for that person that I gave. A lot of the same crits. Yeah, we'll do one of these. We can do this one. So, or maybe I'll just draw a little bit for everybody in this group stage and before it. You know, again, how do we want to actually arrive at our next stage from something like this? Well, we again, you know, kind of want to keep breaking things down in the simplest way possible. And so the way that we need to get there is by reducing things down in the right kind of order of operations, not working on something that's too small before it's time to do so. You can handle all the same. Do you recommend drawing the same figure again after this, or just do another reference? I don't think it matters. I think if you've already done this one though, then yeah, you could just move on and take all the same tips, or you could try doing a copy of, you know, one of the drawings on our website on Halftone Studio. I think that'd be a good idea. This is where the pit of the crotch was a little bit, and just from my memory, the pit of the crotch was a little bit below this head height, or like this right here. The bottom of that like dark area. This is probably, you know, right where the pubic bone actually is. And we want to just think about like, how do we enclose the figure into an envelope? So I know a little bit outside of her head, that we have like this amount of like negative space of hair, so that looks good. From the back of her head, we have a little bit of hair that comes off, and this kind of comes out, and yeah, maybe my angle's a little bit off there, so I'm trying to look at these angles. You can kind of hold your pencil up to the model, to the reference photo, and then transfer it to your paper. That looks good for like the back of the head here. This one head height down was about where the shadow was on the arm, so I know that that shadow, I think, is a little bit below that. That shadow is going to be here. That arm's going to be there. We have this lock of hair, and here I don't want to get too sucked in, so I'm going to keep moving on. I'm trying to think like what would happen if I, you know, draped a blanket over her or something like that, right? This is where that belly button's going to be. I like to, sometimes it's helpful too to come back to the hips, about where the tops of the hips would be. Right in here, just kind of establish a little bit, you know, bottom of the hips or that pubic bone area, that's also where the butt kind of turns inwards and connects too. So I know that like the butt's going to be turning in over here. And I know that there's going to be this angle like this. The back of the figure, this back comes in from, you know, it connects in right about above where the belly button is. I think the belly button was like a little bit below this head height, so make sure I get kind of this big wide angle set. Boom, boom. My arms are going to be in here. And we have that bottom leg that's going to come out like this. We know that the back heel, this is kind of lined up with this. So maybe I'm a little bit too far back with this foot. That's why you check your plumb lines too. Literally nobody is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes when they're blocking in stuff. So you just have to. Yeah, this is going to line up with here. Right, so there we go. Now the back heel is going to go on there. That back heel is going to connect up to here. And it's going to take you a while to do this if you're drawing, 18 by 24 with charcoal. I'm kind of rushing through it because I'm not trying to take all day with this, but and also I'm on digital, so it's like just a smaller real estate, smaller screen. It's like doing a smaller like sketchbook size drawing. It's kind of like the one weird thing about digital. It's like you're always working on something, that's like roughly the size of your sketchbook. You can zoom in and out, which, makes it not the size of your sketchbook, but it fundamentally feels different than working on like a large sheet of paper. All right, so this is about kind of that block in shape. that we want to achieve and go for, and then take a step back and ask ourselves, you know, does this look like the model? Are there big things that need to change? You know, that's when we want to start dialing in a little bit more granularly. We want to check and remember our head heights. We want to think about our plumb line, you know, a little bit outside of our face. She might be like a bit wide in here, maybe not even all that much. You know, I'd probably bring in this a little bit here now. This foot goes on in front of the other foot. These are these big kind of envelope shapes that we want to consider. And this one's got quite a few difficult ones. This pose is not all that easy. What if this is not how I draw at all? Well, this is a strategy for getting correct proportions. So if you find yourself within this group of people, you might want to adopt a strategy for finding more accurate proportions. If you don't care about your proportions, you don't have to do anything academic. But, you know, the idea is you can work in any way you want with the general philosophy and mindset that you want to work from big to small, right? So big to small can mean a lot of different things, but I think it would generally be a bad idea to start a figure drawing by just dropping a fully rendered eye in the middle of the page. I think that there is almost zero way to plan for that in a way that will make your figure fit on the stage properly, or fit on the page properly, and have harmonious values with the rest of it. The idea of big to small can be kind of interpreted and twisted and manipulated in a lot of different ways, though. But there's always somebody who comes in and they're like, well, what if I don't like doing this? It's like, well, maybe you just don't like, you know, any sort of like academic drawing or traditional drawing, and that's okay. But like, nobody's making you do it. So I would try to push for some of you guys to really fill up the page a little bit more. You know, you're actually pretty close here. This isn't bad at all. I would really, you know, take the time to measure out a little bit more. And then also take the time, too, to really set in your contours. Just like I was telling the last guy, you know, use a charcoal pencil. It looks like you're using just fine charcoal on a smooth paper. That's why it's kind of smudging all around. So I'd recommend you try laid paper, which is the paper everyone used in the 19th century. There is a Strathmore. This is the one I like to recommend because it's cheap. Strathmore, maybe it's 1.0. Strathmore 300. Charcoal. This is the student grade one. Laid finish. It's a yellow cover. It's less than $1 per sheet of 18 by 24, I think. It's very cheap, one of the cheaper papers out there. And it's really good. It works great. But I do want to see some, you know, use a charcoal pencil and establish, you know, where is the back of this leg, right? Like, it's not lost in the reference. So establish where that is. And I think like a lot of that is you're just using vine charcoal on smooth paper. So anytime you touch the paper or anything like, you know, this, it just smooths, or it smudges and pushes right off of the page. Having a paper with a bit of texture will fix that issue for you. Yeah, I think we can kind of make this bump a little bit smaller. It doesn't feel like a big difference, but it does make all the difference. This comes out a little bit, maybe a little bit lower. This comes down, around, and make sure you have a line here that's hooking down and around, because right, we have that lower leg here, which is like a cylinder moving away, and that cylinder slots into the back of the foot. Like this, something like that, right? And so when this line comes in, it's going to curve and pull around to the front of that cylinder. The front of the cylinder is here where the knee is. So we want to make sure that all of our lines conform to the surface. And that really strengthens the feeling of three-dimensionality. And then we also want to think about what's going on underneath the surface of these hips. We have, well, the rib cage comes out, and then we have the oblique or the stomach area. it's coming out on both sides, right? If it's coming out, if this is where the oblique comes out of on this side, and then we follow across the line of symmetry over here, this is the top of the oblique on the other side. The top of the oblique is kind of crushing into the rib cage here. So I'm going to make the back of the ribs, the back of the back here come in, and then the oblique come out and on top of it. Make it feel a little bit more three-dimensional. Making something feel like it's on top of something else makes it feel, well, it makes it feel 3D. If everything kind of just like runs into each other, it just feels like a flat shape. But as soon as you do like this, you know, so all of a sudden we get the feeling that like this one is in front of 2, which is in front of 3. And, you know, we're moving back in space. Just because we're like cutting something off with something else. But if we had like this shape inside of this shape and then like this shape inside of this shape, well, now all of a sudden like we don't know what's in front of what. Does charcoal and acrylic gesso make it harder to erase? It might, depending on how smooth the paper is. It's always a little bit harder to erase it on canvas, but it's not really a big deal. Likewise, here we have like this part of the knee that comes out. Right, we have this kind of fat pad on top of the knee that comes out like this. And then it pulls back in and it pulls around, and then the lower leg comes out of this, right? And so we really do want to see some sort of feeling of overlap in here, right? Reestablish that. We really do want to feel this sort of line in here. We want to feel that these marks, you know, like let's say this is our knee area here. When we're coming in and we're making this mark, we have this, which is that fold of the top of the knee here, and there's that fat pad on top of it. But then our marks too, when I do this mark here, I'm coming along the front of the knee, and then I'm chopping off, shaving off part of the side, like I'm chiseling into it, right? That's what this mark is doing here. I'm showing that I'm rounding this and coming to around the edge over here, right? And then we have the back of the leg, which is coming and pulling into here. So yeah, I think you can just use like a charcoal pencil, basically. I think it would help you a lot. And some non-smooth paper. And it's basically that sort of drawing stuff that goes for like every single one of you. Like where I really want to see a little bit more of that contour reestablished, like a little bit more overlapping, a little bit more feeling of things sitting on top of each other. You know, just because you're painting doesn't mean that you can kind of just throw away the whole drawing. And that's kind of what I'm going to say to every single one of you guys. You should do a proper drawing first underneath it. Right, where like we've lost all of what makes that leg beautiful in this painting because we're just trying to like block it in, right? But I think you should kind of block in the drawing first, you know. Where are the overlapping edges? Where are the feeling that, you know, these lines are wrapping around? Yeah, in like every single one of these, right? And I think that's like the number one thing that will make all of these drawings better, other than the counting head heights and proportions. That's kind of like always the number one thing. That just kind of comes with time. Well, you have to practice it too. You have to be intentional about it. Simplifying and thinking about how these things flow and insert on top of each other without getting like super sucked into the shading, right? Because if we get super sucked into the shading, like again, like we have like all this rendering stuff on here, but the most important part of this foot or this leg really is like this feeling that we have this leg coming down, and then we have this fat pad that's crushing out on top, and then we have this section here where the knee is in here. It's kind of like two segments of it. And then we have the back of the leg here, which we can really feel come in and insert here. And we have the calf muscle. It took me a second to remember it there. Pulling out of here. Right, inserting into the leg. And instead, like everything kind of gets, you just turn to this, right? Instead we get this, and it just feels a lot less strong, a lot less structural, basically. This person added clothes in a background, which is fun. But you know, the reason why we do these nude studies is so that we can understand, you know, all the things that I've just been talking about, these, how the body works, you know, so that we can understand the structural ideas of it, how to position things in space, how we can, you know, control these fundamental skills and have like an isolated way to practice them, so that when we go and we do our compositional stuff, we don't make kind of some mistakes of this. And so I think some of the mistakes that could be practiced is like, and I'll talk about this with some other people. I've talked about it a ton in past streams, so you can go back and watch those ones. But like unity of values, so how values are organized, and how, you know, even like the form of this fabric, you know, there's just a lot of values that like jump up to pure white and then like go down to black. And I understand that, you know, some dresses certainly can look like that. You know, in the case of like this. But I think it just doesn't feel like the folds really make any sense. Like this fold feels like it feels like there's like a knee that's like tilting outwards like this, right? It kind of feels like this would be like the pose of the foot here. You know, more of like a straight, like contrapposto leg bearing leg. Because it feels like things are coming down, out, and around, and then there's some sort of like knee here that's causing the point of tension. But it's not. You know, this leg is kind of going straight and down, and so you'd probably get like a lot more like longer pipe folds. You don't really have anything that's pulling a lot of tension around the edge of this. I imagine you were like kind of like looking at maybe a reference that had something like that pattern. You know, likewise for these, like it feels like the dress is kind of cutting in, but for what purpose would the dress be cutting in, right? It might cut in if at the contour of the dress we have these big, you know, again, pipe folds. And if something cuts in that deep, it wouldn't lose all of its tension and just flatten out here at the bottom, right? It would actually continue and show in the contour the actual folding of it. And those folds would kind of continue around the side more like this rather than just laying flat. So I think there's just kind of some lack of understanding about like the form of these things that could be learned from studying the figure, you know, nude, or yeah, actually it's just the best place to learn it. You know, likewise with the background, like this feels very flat on, like this foreground in her, it's very flat on. But then it feels like the background is kind of like all slanting upwards like this, right? And, you know, we have like kind of buildings that are very crooked like this. Same with like this shows like a vanishing point, like going to here. This is showing like a vanishing point going to here. Here, so maybe, yeah, I guess like your horizon line's like over here. There's something deeply wrong with this perspective. And I am not ready to fully break it down for you right now. It's just way too far off of the topic of the stream. Yeah, I don't think the tops of it's too much for me to get into right now. I'm sorry. I'd recommend drawing the figure and doing perspective studies. I have a nice video on perspective. You can check it out. Jake, my Wii isn't working. Can you tell it to work correctly? It's an Xbox 360 Summer, my friend. I'm sorry. I won't allow your Wii to work. And I think that like basically those kind of big drawing issues continue for like every single one of these. So like this isn't going to be a long, you know, this actually might not be a long stream. I think those big drawing issues are kind of present in like every single one of these, where still some of these have some like head counting issues. Oh, this was Prague's. Prague, you're getting a lot better. This is nice looking. I think that one was yours. Yeah, I think this one's yours. Yeah. But there is still some head counting issues. And then there's always kind of like a level of like patchiness that I see with some of your stumping. And I think I'd prefer to just see you kind of like cleanly separate all of your shadow shapes, but this is a very difficult reference because there's a lot of shapes that are like, is it a shadow or is it a dark halftone? It's hard to tell. But I think I would prefer to see you kind of cleanly separate all the light and shadow and just practice kind of shading in all of your shadow into like one nice flat tone and maintaining all of your lights in one nice flat area. And, you know, maybe then you can kind of pull the shadows out a little bit, but I wouldn't focus on it too hard. And then like dump all of your extra mental skill points into just the exact same drawing stuff that I've told every other person here. Actually, like, I would say all of these and most of the, I'd say pretty much everything from like here-ish, all of these are like all the same drawing stuff. And all like similar skill levels. Right, where, yeah, like again, like it's this is like the most exciting part of the leg for me in this pose. And I feel like, you know, we've kind of taken that like nice, strong, weight-bearing, graceful leg that has this feeling, you know, like this is such a feeling of, you know, not only this twisting rhythm, right, but also like this weight is bearing down here from her body and it's clashing here and like we're getting a bunching of flesh within the knee and then it's extending and flowing outwards very gracefully, right? So that like bunching of flesh makes it feel like really strong. And in most of these, and pretty much all of them, like the overlap just isn't quite there, you know? It feels a little bit kind of just noodly. So it's okay to pull something like this, right? You get those big angles. But then I really want to see, you know, again, also, where does this pull off? Where do these rhythms align? I want to see this bump out. I want to see this come in. I want to see this come over. And I want to see some indication that we're rounding the corner here. Just like this. And we're maybe even like folding a little bit right here. And then we have this, and there's actually even another overlap here where you kind of have those thigh muscles that are cutting over. And I want to see too that these back of the leg muscles are coming off of here. And they're coming in and connecting around, you know, that muscle group was kind of left out here, which is why this feels skinny. And then the calf comes out of here. You know, again, the calf is like the size of her wrist, basically. The calf's going to come out from back here too. And this foot feels small too. And I think it's just because we didn't allow ourselves to give enough space for all of that. We're holding space for our limbs this year, guys. We need to hold space for our limbs. All right, much more graceful, proportional balance just by, you know, getting a little bit more of that rhythm and flow. Likewise with Emily here, it's all the same, you know. I focus a little bit less on the tonality of this, you know, again, and allow yourself to find that overlap, you know, and pull, like, you know, maybe this is where the top of the leg starts, right? And if we look at our plumb line too, yeah, this is about where our ankle should be. You know, pull kind of a nice line like this. When you're drawing the feet, look at the head. You know, the feet are similar size to the head. When you're drawing the feet, look at the head. Keep it simple. Same deal. The calves originate. You know, guys, remember this painting. The calves originate. The calves originate from the back of the leg. From all the way up here, actually. This is where, like, the knee is. Calves originate from all the way up here, and they come down asymmetrically like this. And then they go to the heel. So those calves come from a little bit higher up, come down, and then the heel comes out a little bit behind where the ankle inserts. And it's literally the exact same for like all of you. You guys got to work on your drawing skills. This is the most important thing. I know everybody wants to paint, but you can just draw really well and just slap some crappy colors on it. You kind of got to get I'm oversimplifying it a little bit too much there. You can't really do that. But if you can draw really well, it looks good, you know, and you can just kind of like color it in basically, and it's not that bad. It's not that hard. All right, Bugaro said, you know, if you learn to draw well, you can just learn how to paint in like 2 weeks. And I think it's reasonably true. I mean, it's a teacher talking to a student, so, you know, take it with a grain of salt because there's more context to that, but it's moderately true. What about airbrush skills? Yeah, you can just skip everything by tracing over the reference and then just airbrushing in the colors that you pick off of it. And your favorite streamer will tell you that you're too good for the critique stream and that you pat you on the head. Everyone wants the JDD head pats. Bugaro, my favorite painter? No, he's probably not my favorite painter, but he's a guy I like to talk about a lot. I mean, he's just one of the most, you know, important painters of the time, and he was a very good teacher. Very good teacher. Let's think here. Yeah, let's talk about you two. And maybe even Zoe comes into this bunch. There's no ethical uses for the airbrush. Ab. All airbrushes are bad. Abe. Ab. Yeah, I mean, Bugaro's goated. You know, that the thing with, like, I've wanted to do, like, a Bugaro portrait or something for, like, we have done Bugaro portraits for the copy, you know, challenge. You know, like, any monkey can learn to, like, can hold a paintbrush and learn how to paint and throw down some charismatic strokes and, like, copy a Sargent. Like, you know, anyone can sit down and copy a Sargent portrait, provided they have, like, you know, years of training and they're, like, you know, okay at painting. They can learn how to copy a Sargent portrait and make it look pretty good. But the thing is like, with a Bugaro portrait, your drawing has to be locked in so ungodly well, so perfectly accurate. You can't just sit down and slap some paint around and make a Bugaro portrait look good, or, you know, a Jerome or a Boldini or a, you know, even like Madraza or whatever. Like, there's just an upper echelon of 19th century painters that go so far in skill above, you know, Sargent. And I'm not saying Sargent's bad or whatever, but there's just an upper tier of draftsmanship skills, and they're just, yeah, ungodly good. And so it's kind of tough to copy a lot of their works sometimes. I want to talk to all you guys about color and value unification. Zoe, I'd highly recommend you draw, by the way. You can't escape. The icy, chilling grip of drawing is coming for you. And it will touch you. And you don't... Well, you do want to be touched, but you don't... It's going to touch you either way, so let the icy grip of drawing take you, I think. I think I've lost the metaphor. It's important. It's excessively important. It's why every good painter in the 19th century learned how to draw first, you know, roughly first. You can learn how to draw and paint at the same time. I'm not going to be a stickler about it. But it's like really, 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 really good. And it will help you with, you know, like your head sizes and stuff like that. You know, and, you know, a lot of the rhythm stuff that I've talked about, you know, like this isn't bad by any means. It's impressive where you've gotten to without doing a ton of drawing. I don't know if you did an underdrawing for this one, but get it twisted. Drawing does bad. Touch me. Yeah, don't get it twisted, or get it twisted. Drawing's gonna touch you sooner or later, so you should just. I don't want to. Just you should draw. It'd be good. That's a bit of personal advice from a mano a mano. But with all of these, I think that like the drawing's okay in some ways. But there's like a little bit of like, just I want to like put all three of these into a group. And then I want to put like a layer adjustment of vibrance on that group. And I just want to bump the saturation by like 20% and bump the vibrance by like 20%. Maybe this one didn't need it quite as much, but honestly, it still needed it, I think. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Especially you, a little bit, Zoe, she's going to tell me that her photo's bad. But, the grouping and stuff isn't too bad in here. It's just like a little bit timid. I see this like a lot in painters, just like too timid. But like this, everything is like very desaturated. Everything's very gray. And you don't want it to be very gray. Color is a really beautiful and wonderful thing, and it's how you get stuff like this. And I've talked a lot in previous streams about how to mix and match colors. I've also done a lot of YouTube shorts about it and stuff too, where I mix color samples. I think practicing getting those little color cards from Home Depot, the color sample swatches, and trying to match it as perfectly as possible, dabbing the paint on there until it blends in 100% and you can't see it at all. It's very, very good practice, and it's exactly what you're doing every time you're painting. Looking at kind of the general base tone for stuff. If you look at my drawing, my painting in the background, generally I will mix up, an average skin tone. It's very far away and it's very dark back there, so this isn't a good example, but I'll mix up, let's say an average skin tone for an area. If this were my drawing, right, or painting. I'll mix up an average skin tone and I'll kind of just scrub it over the area like this, maybe an average shadow, and I'll kind of scrub it over the area like this. This is the same, thing that you would see in, that you're seeing right here, right, where they kind of have this average skin tone that they're scrubbing as they work down the body. And then they're modeling as they go down. It's very easy to see, in this Edelfelt painting here, right? There's a charcoal drawing layer, spray fixative, and then they mix this, he's mixing the skin tone for this area, and he's just scrubbing it all over this whole area. He scrubbed like a little bit of brown into here. I'm sure he'll scrub a little bit of this tone over there, unless maybe the hips were just darker in this reference or whatever, or model pose. And then more specific, thicker modeling on top of. But you're kind of like generally setting that group up first. And that helps you kind of like unify all of your colors and values together. How are you picking this base tone? By looking and squinting and trying to mix something that's like an average. This is a difficult reference. It doesn't have to be, there's no such thing as like a perfectly accurate base tone. There's no such thing as like a perfectly accurate base tone. The whole point is you're going to model more specifically and modulate the tone on top of it. It's just an average, right? So generally, let's say I wanted to mix this, area. I'm just going to pick a tone from here. I'm not going to look at the right side of my screen. Oh, whoops. I don't need to cover that up. I'll scramble my color mixer. Okay, I want to pick this. I know I need some like yellow ochre. I know I need, it's like a 6 out of 10 in value probably. It's probably like a 6 or 7 out of 10 in value. It's saturated, but it's pretty grayish. Give it like a 30, 45% saturation. Maybe I'll go like a little bit brighter. Okay, so now I mix this up. I put some titanium white and yellow ochre and a little bit of red, cadmium red in a pile, and I mixed it around. And, maybe I threw a little bit of blue in there just to make it less saturated, or a little bit of black in there to make it less saturated. But I'm still too dark and too saturated now looking at the comparison of this. So I'll just throw a little bit more white into there. which desaturates and brightens it. I still need to be a little bit lighter. And it needs to desaturate a little bit. I'm now a little bit too bright, so I'll just throw a little bit of black in there and desaturate it, make it darker. Now we're starting to get really close, right? I'm still like a little bit too saturated, and I'm a little bit too warm or whatever. But like this is a totally fine base tone, like something like this, right? Like we don't have to be super accurate in our base tone. So then we can just take that, you know, we can scrub it over this whole area. Kind of unify these things together, right? And I think what I see in a lot of you guys is a lot of like chasing everything that you see, right? So there's like a lot of these modulations. There's like blues and reds and greens and oranges and purples, and this is very reddish, and then it gets super saturated. And I feel like you're kind of chasing down like, okay, I want this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, because like the photo has that, and I need to make it like the photo. But like you're never gonna get like a striking sense of unity like you would in, you know, any of these paintings from doing that. And the way that they do that, or that, you know, they get, you know, this level of modeling and unity, which is, you know, insane. You don't want to go for this first. This is why I tell you guys to like practice your drawings and stuff, because you don't even get, you know, you don't get this level of modeling without being like a decent draftsman. So you really have to understand like your form and a little bit about anatomy and how things insert into each other and how things wedge and fit on top of each other, how things extend and have graceful rhythms and pull out of each other, and the average simple forms of things. As you understand those from drawing, you know, you do want to paint a little bit on the blockier side. You do want to be kind of blocky, you know, and again, if you want to talk about like, do these guys just copy what they see and try to chase colors? Well, no, look how structural this is actually. This feels incredibly three-dimensional. This feels like we have like a back, you know, a transition. We have like the side plane of the leg. You know, we have spots where we're catching little highlights. This is very three-dimensional, very structural. Same with this face, very blocky, right? Like, boom. There's like, you know, the eyebrow in here, but this is like the whole eye socket in like this. And then, you know, we have our little spot of skin tone catching the light on top of here, creating this, and our pupil in here. And again, like the whole side of the face is kind of in this shadow, but then, you know, we mix up the shadow like a bit more red for this part here. And then we have like our light on top of the cheekbone, on top of here. We have our general base tone scrubbed in here. Okay, now we need to get this like a little bit more specific after we've blocked in this kind of basically planar head. Okay, we mix a new tone like that, or we just fan brush this tone into here, and it mixes it for us, which is like more specifically how they did it. Like, look at this nose, right? Like this nose is like bottom plane, side plane, top plane. It's stupidly structural, right? And then you can build your little hue shifts into there as you go on later on. But like every part of that is like that. And you don't get to paint, you know, beautiful flesh poetry like this stuff until you can model stuff with an understanding of form like this. Because like this, going to this is just a tighter modeling of these halftones, less range, less variance in between them, a better understanding of hue shifts, a better understanding of how to push the paint around. But like, you can't try to jump to this because you're just going to overblow all of your modeling. You know, everything has to be mixed for a purpose, right? Again, like this leg, you know, the lights have this, this base tone, right? And then it's a cylinder. So as we turn away from the light, we need to add in a halftone, right? And then we have areas of shadow where we're fully turned away from the light. And, you know, maybe we have one more halftone here for these more specific transitions. And we have a little area here on the butt that's kind of popping back out, so we add a little bit of light back into that. And now we have kind of this nice structural breakdown of this. We actually have one more tone to add. We have a highlight kind of which dances along like this, right? Like this is the same thing as the original. From a distance. That's the sort of logic that needs to go into it. right? And then like the next stage would just be using a fan brush or whatever, and kind of just pulling these out a little bit, basically just smudging them, but not actually smudging them, because again, I encourage you guys to keep it very structural and blocky while you're learning, so that you can actually understand why a tone is changing from one tone to another. A color doesn't just randomly change and get darker in the middle of your face, right? Like a color doesn't just, like, if I have like a skin tone, like this doesn't just get darker in the middle of my forehead, right? It only gets darker because it rounds the corner of my face, because it goes around a plane change. Unless I have like a mole on my face, or, you know, I have some sort of like skin hue variation or something. But the only reason why something changes is because the form changes. So we have to understand like why things are laid down in that way. You know, and then like as we get a lot more casual and comfortable, and we're making these big scale decisions, like this is just a guy who's doing a lot of this stuff like all at the same time, all at once. He's still laying stuff out actually incredibly logically. He's just a lot more comfortable with the handling of the paint. You know, and you get crazy stuff like this, which again, it's the same process, same stuff. Like it's just a guy who's like stupidly good. Just that he's not like unlocked some sort of secret smooth brush, airbrush that he can do this with. He's just better at seeing smaller differences and mixing smaller differences and still keeping the overall structure without losing it, right? You know, and then again, like you get to Danyan and it's just like impossible to understand how anyone could possibly get this good and make a painting like this in only 24 hours. Like it just doesn't, 24 hours of pose time, not like a single day. And so like I think I see in like all of these, there's like a lot of chasing, you know, again, like shadow to gray to orange to purple to this, but it's like, why? You know, like what's the reason for it, right? And I would, you know, encourage to like group stuff together a little bit more, you know, put your base tone down. Unify this stuff together a little bit more. It's a little bit too red. There we go. A little bit more red. Right, and then it's like, okay, well, where this butt like hooks in, like it creates a little indentation in the hair, so I need like a slightly darker tone in there. Also, I do need like this highlight value on top of the hips, right? To show the top of the hip bone coming through. And actually a little bit of that highlight can kind of dance down the side of the oblique. And then like, yeah, we do actually get a cool tone in here, a little bit of a darker, cooler tone, but it's the side of the oblique here that's like coming and inserting out of this, right? And then like, yeah, we do get some slightly darker values along the edge here, but it's just the edge of that form turning away from us. All right, so like these decisions have to be made for some sort of like logical reason. Right, we have like our hips like this. You know, and in general, like the leg is probably facing a little bit more downwards. Like this is facing like this, and then the leg is facing like this, right? So the leg is gonna get like this slightly darker, cooler tone below the hip joint. And then like, you know, again, like you can take your fan brush or whatever and pull them. You know, everyone's forgotten about how good the fan brush is. Pull those groups into each other. But it's gonna, you know, reduce the amount of kind of disunity that you have. And then, you know, just looking at this reference too, like this shadow is like really difficult. Like everyone's gonna mess it up. It's always better, like if you make the shadow too light, it makes the image feel flat because it makes the shadow feel like it's a light family. It mixes the lights and the darks, it makes things feel flat. And if you make it too dark, then it just makes it feel more unified. So I would just like be careful not to chase down like 10 different tones and values on this. Instead, just try to like group stuff together a little bit more aggressively. So it won't break your drawing. And that's kind of the same thing with all this stuff, right? Like the logic of the shadows here is like a little bit better, but like the edges could be better, and then like the reflected lights here are just too strong. There actually is like a little bit of darkness in here, or light in there. This is like incredibly difficult to paint. And same with this. I think actually the logic here is not bad. You know, if you have a crisp edge, make a crisp edge. There's nothing wrong with having a hard edge. It only tells you the form stronger. You know, like it only makes a it only makes a more affirmative decision about, you know, hey, this is what you're looking at, right? And you kind of have like a lot of like non-committal things here. Like all your edges are soft. All your colors are a little bit too muted, right? Like, don't be afraid to try and make the types of strong, like all the stuff is like here on this, actually, it's not bad. You know, but don't be afraid to put your chest into your decision. Everything could be like much darker too. You're kind of very gray as well. Very, very gray, both in the saturation and in the value, right? Like if you see something that's black, like this is black on the reference, like just make it black, it's fine. If you don't make it black, then everything else has to adjust according to it, and it starts to get really complicated, and you're like making changes from the reference, and like make it easy and just paint what you see, you know? Very good, very good, very good. That's what I gotta say for most of you guys in here. On top of the drawing stuff, you know, same with this, like all the same drawing stuff that I gave to the critiques back here, where it's like a little bit too reliant on value, and you know, it's very clean, but I think you can lighten up a lot of your lights, kind of keep your lights and darks a little bit more separate, keep your halftones nice and clean, and also, you know, rely on your accenting, rely on your overlaps, you know, your drawing stuff a lot more than like making everything perfectly tonal. And I'm going to give the exact same crits to like most of the people in here as well. You know, Potlikins actually did a really nice job on this. You said don't critique your background, but the background actually looks nice. I don't even have like a ton of crit. You know, just like you can spend more time, I think, on stuff. Just not letting your edges get too soft. Which is probably what I would say about this. I would check a plumb line on this one, actually. You know, if you pull a plumb line, you know, make sure you take the time to do this. You pull a plumb line through the drawing. Yeah, I think the inner ankle is more around here. And maybe we need a little bit more room for that foot. And I would rather it run off the bottom of the paper than be, you know, too small. It's actually not even a big deal to run stuff off the bottom of the paper. Yeah, checking your plumb line will help out a lot. Like, it would just makes this foot come forward a little bit too much, and that like all of a sudden just starts to make it feel unbalanced. I would also give maybe a little bit of yeah, the stuff isn't bad. You know, where you have these rhythms, again, like I was telling everyone else, you know, I do want to feel like, you know, pull your lines in a little bit past where they just come off of the contour. Let stuff overlap each other just a little bit more. We really want to, you know, we want to make sure that like this feels like it's not only coming off, but like coming out of something else, you know, connecting off of something else, breaking the outline, you know, breaking the contour. That's what makes good shapes. Good shapes kind of, or good design often breaks the contour. You know, again, like this glute runs right to the side of this kind of quad group that comes down like this. So making sure that like there feels like, you know, some sort of rhythmic connection between these two things helps a lot. You know, and then this again, this comes down and grabs on beside the knee, and then the calf comes out much higher. probably comes back more too. Probably back much more, like this. Helps ground the figure. So every time you pull a line, like this is nice. Every time you pull a line, just you know, pull it like a little bit further than you need to, and then let the other line kind of springboard off of that and overlap it a little bit. And that just shows, you know, what's in front of something else. Everything's pretty nice, Yeah, and you can, like, where you have these dark cast shadows too, you can just pull dark accents. But it's a nice drawing. It's a very nice drawing. You know, it's like this even kind of pulls into here, right? And then this kind of spirals into here. And then this kind of comes out a little bit further back here. And this kind of comes into here, which flows into here. You know, maybe this like hair ties into this rhythm. This ties into this. Always looking for like where those lines can come from and where they can flow towards. You did a nice job on this, but it's markers, which makes it really hard for me to crit because it's like it's like don't make mistakes. I think academic studies are a little bit better done, and I like to do them in charcoal because if you make the mistakes, you can just fix it like infinitely. With marker, it's like, hey, just don't mess up ever. You know, and there's probably just maybe like if you want to not mess up ever, it's just like a greater level of like preliminary drawing you need to do with graphite or whatever. You know, just to prevent. Yeah, I just need to practice. Yeah, it's cool to do stuff. I love markers. It's cool to do stuff in markers. You know, I would probably recommend just like a little bit more of like a pencil drawing, just so that like stuff like lower leg doesn't get too small and stuff like that. You know, again, or actually here, everybody kind of lumped all this together, made it like a wet noodle. I think you actually made these bumps all a little bit too strong. So that's like the other mistake you can get. The big motion of it is kind of this, right? And there is like some slight bumps in here, but there's a really nice drawing example of this actually. With this drawing, if you try to draw this just by like looking at it part by part, this arm I'm thinking of, you know, you might come off like this, and then, you know, you try to match that angle, you hit the wrist area, and then maybe I'll like come down, or I meant to say the elbow, and you come down like this, and then this comes up like a little earlier, out, kind of curves in, this like overlap here. Like you can do like a decent drawing. And then you gotta put like the elbow on, right? And it's like, oh yeah, like everything feels right. But the problem is like, if you overlay this onto here, even if I line it up properly, no matter like how nicely you try to like make this elbow actually really almost doesn't exist. Like you are always going to exaggerate this elbow by making the bump too big. When you actually look at this drawing, it's like a millimeter that this elbow extrudes by on this line. And it looks beautiful. It looks beautiful because of the overlap, because of this coming into like this, you know, and this also kind of flows down again for the rhythm stuff, right? But there's no way to ever pull like that small of a change by like trying to tack on part by part, right? The only way to do it is to get like the overall thing. You know, maybe something like that. And then, you know, build it into the outline a little bit instead of like trying to like tack on something at the end. And so you know, with the knee, if you try to like, you know, come down and go like bump, and then there's another bump, and then another bump, and then another bump, and then it comes around. Like you do technically have all the parts, but it's just always going to look like this, right? In actuality, you know, the knee has to be built. You know, maybe this is like your rhythm or whatever. This is where the knee is. Like you have to come off of this. You know, build out the whole structure. Right? And then you can kind of come in and just, all you need to do is just like give like a little notch. And that actually like makes the bump, or implies the bump, or makes the bump on its own without like needing to do a bump by bump. And then we have the final few, which is Adam, Hevo, and Jacob. So I think Jacob cleared. Adam, your painting's looking amazing this week. We switched to the Coke Zero, so I'll just give him a thumbs up. I think this guy passed. I think it couldn't get any better than this. He's kind of just fully peaked in art. He switched to the better Coke. I haven't seen this can design though, and I do like the time spent into doing the bubble letters or whatever. Honestly, I'd give you like kind of the same crit that I gave Zoe. I know you didn't draw for this too, so I would also tell you to draw. Because I think you just get stuff where like it gets like a little bit too bendy in here, right? With like the plumb line. Like this is all technically correct. But I think, yeah. You just get like a little bit too bendy, like a little bit too bumpy in here. It starts to look like just a bit too unnatural. The way you fix that is to draw. All right. You kind of know that. It's pretty accurate, actually, you know, on the plumb line. But it's kind of the same stuff that I'd probably tell Zoe. Yeah, we're to try and have a little bit more of like a form or like a sculptural reason why each color is there, right? Because I think it's just like, especially in this area, it's a tough reference. There's just so many different changes in hue and in value in this reference. You know, being really intentional about like, okay, like setting a base tone, you know, things after here, like get the mid-tone. Skip Hevo. Why would I ever skip Hevo? Nobody's been in my pockets. I mean, that would be out of pocket to skip Hevo, and I wouldn't do that. What's the next challenge? Probably do like a portrait master copy. Do you have to join the Discord to submit? Yep. You know, it's like a little bit too many, I think, just like change and variation within like all of this too. Probably push down this reflected light in here as well. The light in here is like kind of stronger, so it's like a little bit difficult. I think it's just like one too many values in a lot of this stuff. And then like, okay, like I get the highlight here along the top of the hips and along the oblique, and then like maybe it gets slightly, we get a half tone just to like give like a little bit of modeling for like the front of the oblique, right? And we get like that standard base skin tone here for like the side of the stomach, side of the abs, and then we get like this cool half tone where we transition into the shadow. We get like a little bit of like a core shadow there. I know it's like not actually exactly how it is in the reference. It's very washed out here. I would probably strengthen it a little bit. You know, we have this kind of shadow that's like wrapping around the bottom of the stomach and the bowl of the hips. Integrate that in. You can kind of just like pull a lot of this like general tone like down and across. You need to look at the reference. Yeah. And then like you want to make sure that like I think you want to make sure that you know you have these shadows here are kind of pulling with the with the rhythm, with the motion of the paint. Along the leg like this, right? And this extends up the side. Should probably have the photo in front of me the whole time. I try not to make this like yeah, so it's mostly just like having like a structural reason to like integrate these groups together, right? This base tone will probably come down along this ridge here, right? You can like fan brush this across. Maybe have like, you can put down just like a touch of base tone here where like the hip juts outwards, right? You're modeling like along the cylinder here, or across the cylinder. So I just want to make sure that like, kind of there's a reason why everything happens. I think this leg's much more integrated. But a lot of what makes this leg difficult too is just there's not a drawing. So it feels like a little bit noodly. I think you said you didn't draw. I'm almost certain you said that. Or you just like drew in paint. Yeah, it's a little bit better. You know, again, I'll show you a bunch of paintings that you'll say are bad or something like that. I mean, it's tough to, you know, Dunyan's actually really still doing like the same thing though, right? Like it's that base, there's a base tone like kind of smudged all over that you can see this like kind of cooked into the canvas color. And then you have like your highlight here, you have like a darker halftone, another halftone tone, and then your shadow tone. And then here you just have that same tone over there. You're just rounding the form, rounding the cylinder. But there is, you know, a structural reason why, you know, all these plane changes are, you know, while being incredibly subtle, there is actually a structural reason why all of them are happening. And it's the same thing that's happening here. You know, I think you just kind of have to get really good at doing this in order to bridge the gap to doing this, right? You know, likewise with this type of stuff too. Or this. It's the same exact stuff happening, just at like different levels of progression and skill. And it's, you know, and how this is carved out too. It's like incredibly, incredibly structural, right? We have like that center highlight, halftones on the side, and that's pretty much it, you know, shadow in the dark areas. Same thing happening here. It's a nice little sketch of the guy sitting in front of him. And it's kind of similar stuff for like Hivo as well. Kind of similar stuff for Mr. Hivo as well. Pretty much always kind of tell you the same thing every time, which is that like things are like a little bit soft. And like there's just more room for structure, and structure has to come from like understanding, right? So like that's the hard part. So right, like you can have a lot, your room light is like kind of, this photo's kind of dim, but you can have, it's kind of cool. You can get like a cool bright highlight here, right? You can have like a halftone like here, maybe like a little bit here. And then you can have like, you know, your general tone in here. And there's maybe like a little bit of spot that comes out like right here. I can't tell, I think it's just like hair, but I also like the forehead does kind of slope in a little bit. So maybe if you pull it out here, then I guess you pull it out there on the other side. And then this is like the central plane of the forehead. And then this highlight would be riding along this top rim of the forehead. All right, so using the same tones you have, basically, I added a highlight, but just extracting like a lot more form out of them. And it's going to be like the exact same case for like the cheeks too, right? Where you get like, this isn't as strong as the highlight here, so I'm going to use the base tone for here, for the highlight here. Likewise in here, we can use the highlight for the top of the nose. You can kind of carve these cheeks in a little bit harder. We don't have to like smudge every single edge in here. All right, so there's like our base tones, and then we do need like a half tone here. So I can kind of just like pull this out a little bit. That works. I'm gonna desaturate it a bit. It gets kind of grayish. But you can kind of drag this out a bit more. Like this, like this, like this. And I'm just dragging these simple tones into each other to integrate them into each other without, you know, you need to be able to stop yourself from doing this so much that every edge rounds. Because, you know, the face just like isn't really very rounded. It is like a little bit, but it's really not as rounded as you think. Like there's a lot of pretty significant hard edges. Top of the cheekbone, and the only way to do this is just to like have a stronger structural understanding of the face. It is a difficult, you know, like face pose. Like your drawing's always like pretty solid. I think you just need to like spend like a little bit of time like practicing like color mixing, practicing like grouping. Working in trad mediums is good though. Give a little bit of size to this, or a little bit of width to the side of the face. Yeah, just making things like a little bit more structural, and you can also kind of mix up your hue variation. It's very hard to do like hue variation on this stuff. You know, even in here, like right, like you have a shadow tone in here, which could be darker too. Like you can just increase the contrast here. You just straight up like mix some black into this. Right, but then like look at this halftone that's like carrying outwards from this point. Because this is like a muscle that's kind of rounding from here, and you're getting like this egg-shaped form like in here, right? So you need to have that halftone, and then you need to have, you know, your highlight on top of it, and your halftone on the other side. Much darker halftones. You have a lot more room for these halftones. A lot more room for them, and it just makes them feel like a lot more structural in 3D. You know, you can see how much more structural the face feels off of that. It's very difficult to do that without making your face like look aged, you know, or too carved out. Just the tones have to be more subtle. You know, there we go. And the last one I'm gonna do is Mr. Jacob L. Jacob did a nice job on this. I definitely recommend you check out, well, all the stuff I said in this stream, especially about the color and rhythm stuff that I talked about with a lot of these paintings. Because there is some rhythm stuff, but in general, like I think like this is the right stages towards building something like this. I think you said you're 16 hours in, which actually, I talked with you briefly about, you know, going too fast. It's not bad for 16 hours. There's just like another pass that you can take on this stuff, right? Like, I'll bring it over here. Right, like there's just like another pass that you can take on this stuff. Where you can probably put I don't know if your paint's absorbing into the paper too much. This might be canvas. I think you can probably just paint like a little bit thicker so that you get a bit more flow, because you don't have enough flow if it doesn't paint thick enough. And then yeah, like you can, same thing that I told Hevo, like kind of put in like a slightly darker halftone in here and then use a fan brush, you know, to pull it out a bit more. And kind of recognize and round these forms just a bit more. You can get just a bit more modeling out of everything. You know, this whole side of the arm can get toned down a bit. Just push your kind of contrast. Your halftones are always like, halftones always are very close to the tone of the shadow, or they're closer to the tone of the shadow than they are to the lights. They like to, and by halftones I'm talking specifically about the transitioning halftone. Yeah, and then you can use your fan brush to kind of just pull across a little bit. Just to integrate these into each other a little bit more. All right, and you know, I can send you this Edelfelt if you want. Really, you know, it's not even like all that much more integrated than yours. I think the tones are just like a little bit closer together, a little bit nicer, a little bit more integrated. You know, so, you know, I don't even feel like this highlight is like particularly wrong. I think maybe just like everything else just needs to be like a little bit darker. Feels maybe a little bit more fleshy. I did it on top of this, so there's no before and after comparison, so I can't be held liable for my my decisions. You know, likewise in here, I like this is nice. It's not bad. I wouldn't chase down like this like little bluish hue thing. It's just going to be a little bit too difficult, a little bit too subtle. Maybe reflected lights are getting a little bit too bright in here as well. I want to reintegrate all this together. And then again, like same crit I gave like Shep and Zoe and like the people before. You know, just be like a little bit more intentional. Like, okay, top of the hip, you know, maybe there's a little bit of light going along, you know, the side of the obliques here. We have like a little bit of light along the side of the stomach. We have like this like kind of grayish tone along the side of the stomach here. And then we, you know, maybe have like a slightly grayer tone along the side of the oblique in here. So you do kind of like, it's not just painting what you see. You kind of need to like use what you know to like inform these ideas about how things are fitting into each other and overlapping it. Yeah, I think you do need to use like a little bit more paint. Your paint needs to like flow a bit thicker. I can't tell from the photo. Maybe I shrunk it down so it's, you know, it could be higher res. But just when I see like a paint dragging texture like this, that's like dry brushing. That comes from not having enough paint on the brush. Yeah, I think you can just I would just keep spending time on this. I really would kind of try to keep taking passes to like to keep this stuff like nice and integrated. You know, especially like in here, like you have a lot of black. You got, I think like all the right pieces in the right places, but like I think you can push like a little bit more, you know, dark brown into these areas. I think I got to ponder about what I'm looking at more when I'm painting. That's kind of, yeah, that's just kind of it. You know, that's kind of the realization that kind of keeps happening over and over again. Yeah, I'd open up the value range of this like just slightly more. Just make color, push more color into this. Broaden up this a little bit too. You can kind of think of this like this is like one tube area. You have like this kind of shorter tube, and then you have like this like elongated tube, right? And so on top of the tube, you get like this highlight. On the sides of the tubes, you get like this dark brown, and then like at the, you know, absolute sides of the tubes or the quick turn, you get these really dark black values. Just opening like a bit more range up into this, you know, especially in here, right? Like you get your dark brown in here, but it actually does gradate out a little bit more towards like a golden as we get into these areas, which I can kind of keep pushing my saturation on. It does kind of gradate out like this. It kind of goes from black to dark brown. Black, dark brown here, you know, with these just kind of overlapping into each other a little bit more. With some like interesting shapes and stuff. And, you know, where you have this kind of looser strands and stuff like that, you don't have to, you know, try to like recreate every strand perfectly, but you can just insinuate that by lightening the color and, you know, putting in some like softer areas around there. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'd keep working on this one. Don't abandon it. You know, you can keep pushing this stuff, and it will keep getting better. And I think that's everyone. That's everybody. This stream was only 2 hours and 53 minutes, not even 5 hours. But I hope these kind of like big ideas that I talked about here, you know, help push you guys forward a little bit more, because this is the type of stuff that's important. And I don't want to just sit here and be like, oh, you know, bump this around and bump this around. You know, I think that it makes drawing a lot more like copying photos. And I think that there's really interesting ideas that we can pull from history in order to make drawing a lot more fun, engaging, and meaningful and purposeful, which is kind of the whole point, is finding fulfillment in this stuff rather than just like practicing something. Yeah, so thank you everybody for coming to the Jake Don't Draw Livestream Super Show Extravaganza experience. I will be posting a new challenge tomorrow. I'm thinking about a master copy. Kind of sucks to do a nice master copy because I'm not even done with this one yet, but you know, that's just the way she blows. Thanks for coming to